For nearly 4 years, the Barbarian King has been one of the fiercest troops within the game Clash of Clans. Alongside his queen, they are quite the power couple. But how did these two come to be? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of how the Barbarian became the Barbarian King. Let's start way back at the beginning, back in 2013. On January the 10th, 2013, it was just a regular day in the Clash village, where troops were going about their daily lives. Barbarians and hogs were having arm wrestles, archers having shooting contests, giants boxing, goblins stealing, and builders building. It was another average day in the village. Until two barbarians came across an abandoned balloon and decided to take it for a trip. The two barbarians got into the balloon and set off. They went whichever way the wind would blow them. After sailing for almost an hour, they both got very thirsty and realized that there was only one small container of water. One of the barbarians, whose name was Barbar, decided to be selfish and drink almost 3/4 of the water, and only giving his friend Ian 1/4. Ian wasn't too happy about this, but didn't faze him too much since he didn't want to start a fight with him, mainly because Barbar was bigger than Ian and would most likely kick his butt if they ever fought. Anyways, shortly after, they came across a new island. This island is not to be confused with other islands that have recently been discovered. There was no master builder or battle machine on this one, and when they sat down, they took a quick look around and found that the place was empty, and they were the only ones there. Then after a bit more exploring, at the center of the island, they found something brand new that they had never seen before. They found a small waterfall and a small lake filled with a black liquid. Ian, who was dying of thirst since Barbar didn't share much with him, didn't care that it was black and just dove in and took a big gulp. After satisfying his thirst, he got out to rejoin his friend. Barbar also tried a small sip of the black liquid, but not too much since he was still a bit full from the water that he drank earlier. Ian thought it would be a good idea to refill their small container with some of the mysterious black liquid, just in case they got thirsty again. They didn't have too much time to examine the black liquid or any more of the island, because as Ian was getting out of the small lake, some storm clouds began to form above them. So they rushed back to their balloon and set flight back home. As they started flying off, the storm began to get worse. Wind started blowing them back and forth, rain was pouring down, and lightning was striking all around them. The storm was like nothing they'd ever seen before. The barbarians thought to themselves that the wizards must have finally finished upgrading that lightning spell. But then all of a sudden, a bolt of lightning came and struck the balloon, sending electricity through both of the barbarians' bodies. The jolt of electricity ended up sending Barbar overboard, and he fell into the ocean, badly injuring himself, unsure of whether or not he would be able to swim to shore. And then the electricity ended up knocking Ian unconscious, and he fell asleep. When Ian woke back up, he realized that the balloon had carried him all the way back home. He had to go tell everyone what happened. He grabbed his sword and the container of black liquid and ran off towards the town hall. As he ran through the village, he got weird looks from everyone, but he ignored them. When he made it to the town hall, he began telling the story, but got cut off halfway through when the wizard asked him, "Who exactly are you?" Ian, who was extremely confused, told them, "It's me, Ian." Then he caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror. He looked nothing like he used to. He stood almost 3 feet taller and was as big as a giant. Not to mention, he outgrew his clothes and was standing in the middle of the town hall butt naked. After covering himself up, he told everyone what happened and showed them the black liquid. The wizard suggested that the lightning had a reaction with the black liquid and made him bigger and stronger, and that he should use his newfound powers to help the village within the next battle. The next day, they went into battle. It was an all-out attack using tons of each troop. All around him, barbarians were getting smashed left and right, but when he started being targeted, he didn't die. He was able to soak way more damage than any other barbarian. Then when the battle had ended, when all the troops turned back into Elixir, he just stood there, waiting for himself to turn into Elixir too. But he never did. So he decided to head back to the village. The wizard was shocked to see him again and figured that along with super strength and health, he was also immortal now. So as the days went on, he would go and fight more battles, and come back each and every time. He had won their village many battles, and to thank him for his contribution, they built him an altar, where he could regain his strength by sleeping there. Then one day, a builder discovered a black liquid supply underneath the village, and built a drill to help dig it all up. It was the same black liquid as the one Ian had drank before, and they decided to finally name this liquid. They decided to call it Dark Elixir. To thank Ian some more, they gave him some dark elixir, and Ian drank it all and then fell into a really deep slumber. He did not wake up for nearly a day, and when he finally did wake up, everyone noticed that he grew a little bit, and he felt a little bit stronger. The villagers thought that if they kept feeding him this, then he could keep growing and become unstoppable. So they started farming Dark Elixir and stealing it from other villages. And after feeding him the Dark Elixir 3 more times, he developed a new superpower. When in battle, he could burst out into a rage and summon some mini Ians to fight alongside him. Ian was so powerful and so strong that every base he attacked, he was victorious. The village decided to crown him king. After all he did for the village, they gave him his crown. And to this day, he continues to fight alongside the villagers and defend them from other invasions. He was the village's only savior and their only hero. At least he was, until she came along. But that's a story for another time. Right after Barbar fell into the water, he slowly began sinking to the bottom of the ocean. But as he sank closer and closer towards the bottom, a heal spell dropped out of nowhere. Then another, and another. There must have been at least 35 heal spells sent from villages all around the world. Heal spell after heal spell started falling all around him. The heal spells combined to heal all of his wounds. He could now also hold his breath for an incredibly long time. Either that or he always could hold it for that long. Feeling extremely grateful, Barbar was determined to not waste his second chance. Although he did have a very long and important road ahead of him, Barbar was destined to be something much greater. Barbar's story was just getting started. As he regained his strength on the ocean's floor, he realized that he had dropped his sword when he was shocked by the lightning and fell from the balloon. So without his sword, he started heading towards the nearest land, which just so happened to be the one next to the one that he came from. Except it was the island right next to it. When he reached the island, he met an older looking fellow who called himself Jeff. When Barbar tried to respond, he realized that he couldn't. The lightning shock must have caused him to be unable to speak. This made him quite upset and angry, but he still tried his best to explain with gestures what had happened. Jeff seemed to understand what he meant, and Jeff explained his problems to Barbar. Jeff was getting old and weak, so was unable to do much physical activities, so he asked Barbar for his assistance. Barbar, not being able to speak, just shrugged yes and helped Jeff with all the heavy lifting and physical parts of his jobs. Time seemed to go by extremely quickly on this village for some reason, because in what felt like a few days, they were able to construct almost an entire mini village. With all of Jeff's amazing designs, you could consider him to be the master builder. If only he weren't so weak and old. As time progressed, Barbar ended up helping Jeff create his best creation yet. Together they created an exosuit for Jeff that they called the Battle Machine. The exosuit gave Jeff more strength and also had a feature where he could use lightning to give him more energy. Then once he got out of the suit, the lightning's energy would be inside of him, and he could continue building all on his own. So since the master builder could now support himself, Barbar thought it would be time to head back to his village. What felt like a few weeks to Barbar was in reality actually 4 years. But before Barbar could leave, the Master Builder had a surprise for him. The Master Builder had built a statue of Barbar as a way to say thank you for all his help. Barbar, who still couldn't speak, smiled and then ran into the water. He ran all the way to his village, but when he got there, he saw something that he's never seen before. He saw the biggest barbarian he'd ever seen in his life, and it looked like his long-lost friend, Ian. Barbar tried to go say hi to him, but apparently Ian was a very popular guy. So Barbar pushed himself through the crowd, and once he got to the front, he tried to speak. But of course, he still couldn't from the lightning. So instead what came out was a little squeal. Everyone started laughing at him. So Barbar felt sad and went to go sit down by the beach. The Wizard and Hog Rider felt bad for him, so they went over to try and keep him company. While they were just sitting there, the Hog Rider asked,
"Hey guys, you ever wonder what's across the water?"
I wonder how we'd get over there.
The barbarian already knew what was out there and really wanted to tell them, but couldn't because he was now mute. So instead, he ran off into the ocean, hoping that they would follow him. He ran all the way to the village and never looked back. The Wizard and Hog Rider decided to take a boat there instead. By the time Barbar got to the island, the Wizard and Hog Rider had already beat him there. Except when Barbar found them, he saw that they turned into Elixir and Dark Elixir. Barbar was furious that the only troops that were being nice to him had died. He had a quick rage where he started smashing things. He ran into a tree and smashed it to pieces. After about 4 seconds, his rage died down, and he picked up a stick that he broke from the tree, which he later decided to turn into an axe to replace his sword. Barbar ended up deciding to stay with the Master Builder, since everyone back home was laughing at him. So for a little bit, it was just Barbar and the Master Builder on the island. Until one day, an invisible archer showed up. She was a pretty sneaky archer, and curious where she came from, she told them her story. Not long after the mighty barbarian king had made his presence known in the village, he shared his story on how he became so big and powerful. The alchemists from the laboratory paid very close attention and wished to replicate this on other troops. So for months they performed tests on almost every single troop within the village. They would take 2 of each troop, feed one a lot of dark elixir, and then the other one just a few sips. Then they attempted to electrocute them to get the same reaction as that had happened with the barbarian king. Sadly, they had no success. Hundreds of innocent troops' lives have been lost in an attempt to create another super troop or hero. But don't get too angry about this, because it's not murder or anything like that. Because after each troop died, they turned into elixir. Then they would take that elixir and go train a troop again. This went on for about 3 months, and during that time the village progressed so much that it was able to upgrade its town hall all the way to Town Hall 9. And shortly after the town hall was finished being upgraded, the alchemists tried an experiment on the archers. There were 2 archers named Ark and Her. They gave Ark a whole bottle of dark elixir, and Her got a small sip. They went through the exact same process of being electrocuted, then both fell to the floor. The alchemists were disappointed in another failure and decided to call it a day, so they locked up the laboratory and left. But what they didn't know was that the archers hadn't died, since they didn't turn into elixir. They simply fainted from the shock. They were each wearing their special friendship bracelets that were made out of gold that they got from the gold mine, and the gold was able to conduct most of the electricity from the shock. So both archers got up and quickly realized that they were locked in a pitch black room inside of the lab. At first they freaked out, but to pass time they took turns telling each other stories about how much fun it would be to create an arena where they could just battle against other kingdoms, just troops versus other troops, and they could call it something like Clash Rumbles or Clash Battles. But before they could figure out a better name for it, the door to the lab bursted open and light shined in on them. The archers were so happy to see daylight again that they ran right past the alchemists into the open. The alchemists were incredibly confused and wondering what just happened. Then they turned around and saw 2 archers, but then they disappeared, and then they were there again. They were sort of flickering as if they were there and then not. Not only were the alchemists shocked, but the archers were too. This was the first time that they were seeing themselves as well, and Ark, the archer that drank more of the dark elixir, was almost 3 times the size of a regular archer. But then one of the alchemists screamed, and everyone else screamed too. Everyone was scared of the archers, but the archers claimed that they weren't ghosts. So the troops were not sure, and they decided to capture the 2 archers and they took them to the king for him to decide. He could either have them killed for being ghosts and possibly being evil, or he could set them free and maybe use their powers for something good. The king couldn't decide on his own, so he decided to put it to a vote. He asked all of the villagers and nearby villages for their opinions, and he said that by the same time next week, he will tally the votes and decide. A week later, after counting all of the votes, it was determined that the archers would not be killed. They figured that ghosts really aren't that scary, especially considering that they have dragons, giant metal robots, and rock golems roaming all around the place. So even if they were ghosts, it wouldn't actually be that scary. Since they decided to let the archers live, they still wanted to figure out why they were sometimes turning invisible and sometimes not. So the alchemists took a look and realized that their experiment had actually worked, however not in the way that they expected. It turns out that they had different abilities compared to the barbarian king, Ian. So since Ian was the only one who had been through this before, he wanted to help Ark and Her to master their abilities and teach them to use it properly. So the next few weeks they trained all day, every day. They found that they didn't have the same ability as Ian, the barbarian king. Rather than raging and spawning barbarians, they were both able to turn invisible for a few seconds, where no one could detect them. They could turn invisible on command, but them staying invisible ate up a lot of energy, and would take a while before they could do it again. Ark also seemed to be much better at this than Her was. Plus Ark seemed to have the ability to do even more than Her. She could regenerate her health, spawn more mini archers, and do way more damage. Even Ian was impressed with what she could do. He was really impressed by Ark, and after a full day of training, the 3 of them decided to go out for something to drink at the Clash Tavern, where they each ordered a round of elixir. But Ian, being the king of the village, got a special bottle of dark elixir instead. While they were all enjoying themselves, Ian ended up talking to the village chief, and the chief was mentioning something about how, now that the village is getting bigger and stronger, he may need a queen to help him rule the village. Ian thought this was a really silly idea, but it also rested in the back of his mind, knowing very well that it was also true. The next day at training, both of the archers had pretty much mastered their new abilities. Then at the end of their training, He declared that their training has come to an end, and that it was up to them to use their abilities for the greater good of the village. And then the next day, they entered into their first battle since becoming these new super troops. During the battle, Ark absolutely dominated and helped carry her team to the 3-star, whereas her wasn't even deployed because the chief must have forgotten about her. And like the Barbarian King, Ark was also immortal and was able to be used in the next battle after a short rest. Ark was praised around the village and everyone adored her. After everyone was finished congratulating Ark on a great battle, Ian approached her and asked her to be his new queen. So Ian proposed, and then Ark replied with a gleeful yes. And their wedding was set to happen the next day. Everyone was excited, except for her, since she was jealous of Ark for being stronger and having more powers, and for getting to marry the king of the village. Although she was jealous, she was also Ark's best friend, so she wanted to be there to support her. So on the day of their wedding, they each went through their vows, and when it came time for Ian's speech, he said, "Thank you all very much for being here. Now that we are happily married, together we will rule this kingdom, and she will assist me in getting many more 3-stars for this village. We both swear that we will defend this village with our lives, and to lead our troops into battle. This day marks a new age in our village, and things will never be the same again." And he was right. Things were definitely going to change, hopefully for the better. After the wedding, Her went to go congratulate the two on their marriage, and Ark was so happy to see her. Ark said, "Thank you so much. I honestly don't know what I would do without my best friend. You're the best." And as days passed, Ark and Ian were still happily married and continued to be the backbone of all of their attacks, and also helping out on defense. They truly were the heroes of the village, and were irreplaceable. And Her usually stayed back at the village since she wasn't immortal like Ark. So Ark kept her at home to protect her from any dangers. And as days went by and months passed, the new Archer Queen kept getting stronger and stronger, until eventually she was even stronger than the Barbarian King, and Ian was not happy about that. In fact, he felt a bit threatened, that people might like her more than him. So he had to do something about that. Something that could ruin her. Something that could make people hate her. Something that is so diabolically evil and crazy that it has to be told in the next story. Not long after Ian and Ark had gotten married, they both continued to be the village's favorite troops. They would stomp on just about every base they would attack, so obviously the village continued to use all of their available Dark Elixir to upgrade their powers even more. And as the days went on, the village kept farming Dark Elixir. But it seemed that the villagers had chosen a favorite hero. In battles, people were choosing to use healers to keep the queen alive, but they would just send the Barbarian King as a sacrifice. Now obviously the two heroes were immortal, so it didn't matter too much. However, the Barbarian King was pretty upset that no one liked him as much. He also felt that since he was the first hero, he deserved most of the love from the villagers. But that clearly wasn't the case, because not only were people doing queen walks and never king walks, they were also leveling the queen and ignoring the king. This was really starting to get the Barbarian King frustrated, but he didn't do anything. He just kept trying his best in battles and did his best to get through each day, living in the Archer Queen's shadow. But then one day, the entire village came bearing gifts for the royals, as a way to say thank you for all of their help in battles and on defense. So first they brought the king a new metal glove that can be used for extra protection in battle. Ian said his thank yous, and then they moved on to the Archer Queen's gift. They handed her a brand new creation. It was a miniature Expo variant created by the master builder himself. This mini Expo was the most powerful weapon in the village and could destroy most buildings in only a few hits. So the queen, who was ecstatic, said thank you and then went to go test it out. After seeing what the queen had gotten, Ian felt super betrayed that they would give her a super cool gift, but then he only got a new metal glove. He was also already feeling pretty down that everyone liked the queen more than him, but this was the last straw. He was sick and tired of being second to the queen, so he decided that it was time for him to do something. He knew that he couldn't do anything directly to the queen, since she was stronger than him, and besides, everyone would probably know this, so he had to think of something that could indirectly affect her, and then it hit him. He quickly got to work and took a quick visit to the alchemist. The wizards handed over a grey vial and told the king that this spell hasn't been released yet, we are still working on it, and we aren't sure of the side effects yet, but it's supposed to knock out whichever troop you use it on, and they shouldn't wake up for at least a week. We call it the sleep spell. So Ian grabbed the spell and also snagged a heal spell while he was at it, and then he did something sinister. He went to find the Archer Queen's best friend and then used the sleep potion on her. She instantly passed out and began snoring. He then picked her up and took her to the beach. There he saw a barbarian, hog rider, and wizard sitting down, talking about what they think was out beyond the horizon. That gave him an idea. He took the sleeping archer to a secret boat and put the archer down in the cabin area, and laid the heal spell down right next to her. And then he got out and pushed the boat out towards the hog rider and wizard. After that, they were never seen in the village again. The archer queen began freaking out that her best friend had disappeared, and it was really starting to affect her mental state. Some raids, she would be so distracted that she would start targeting walls, even when there was a really obvious building nearby. You could almost say that her new favorite target was the wall. People started getting really frustrated at her, so Ian felt like he had successfully achieved what he wanted. But back to the boat. There was a really bad storm that caused the boat to crash into a mysterious island. Unfortunately, the hog rider and wizard did not make it, but lucky for the archer, the heal spell bottle broke and healed her from her injuries, keeping her alive when the boat crashed. So when the sleep spell wore off, she got out of the broken boat and explored the mysterious island. And not after long, she found two individuals in what looked like a mini village. One was a barbarian holding an axe, and the other said that he called himself the Master Builder. Back on March 12th, 2013, things were a lot different in the Clash of Clans village. For one, there was a recent discovery of Dark Elixir, so the village had found a new way to create and clone these new flying troops called minions. And a lot of the villagers had high expectations on what this new, better version of Elixir could do. They just couldn't wait to see what they could create next. So this is going to be the tale of how the Hog Rider met his hog. Here is the Hog Rider's story. Back when the village was first getting established, the chief had to make a seriously tough decision. He had two similar troops that did practically the same thing, but unfortunately, he could only keep one due to army space limitations. So he decided to have these two troops duel it out to see who should get to stay. The two troops that were needing to compete was a barbarian who had a great mustache, was illiterate in English, could hold his breath for more than an hour, and who wielded a sword. The barbarian was facing off against a troop named Rider, who also had some great facial hair, was an extremely annoying singer,
Oh, did we make that super clear?
had a fear of skeletons, and wielded a hammer. The two of them met in front of the chief, and then on the chief's command they fought. The fight was over in less than a minute, as the barbarian absolutely dominated Rider. His hammer was no match for the barbarian's sword and muscles. Not to mention he also had the barbarian king teach him how to fight properly. So Rider unfortunately lost and was not allowed into the village's army. Instead, he got stuck with all of the dirty work such as preparing all the meals for the armies and cleaning up other troops' messes. His job sucked. But he got to work immediately and went over to the campfire to start preparing the next meal. When he got there, there were already some giants sitting around and it looked like they were playing some sort of game. When Rider got closer to the camp, he realized that they were tormenting one of the hogs that were meant to be barbecued later. The hog took a quick look at Rider and gave him a look of desperation before a giant threw him to another giant as if they were playing football. American football, that is. Rider knew that he had to do something, but he also knew that those giants could easily crush him without any effort if they caught him. He thought about it quickly, but then continued to make his way over to the army camp that the giants were playing at. And once he got there, he told the giants that he needed the hog so that he could cook it for dinner. So the giants reluctantly handed over the hog. The hog was just as big as Rider. Rider then took the hog back the way he came, but before he could get too far, a giant yelled out,
Hey, that's not the way to the kitchen. He's a thief.
Then all of the giants got up and quickly ran after Rider and the hog. Rider was running out of space to run as they were running straight towards a section of walls. The giants were starting to gain on them, and Rider and the hog were both running into a corner of walls. Luckily, at the last second, the hog threw Rider onto his back and then leaped over the wall. They then continued to run all the way deep into the forest. Rider took a quick look back and realized that the giants had gotten trapped behind the walls, and he thought that they will be stuck there for a while, so they should be safe for the time being. After Rider and the hog got settled down, they were both extremely appreciative for saving each other's lives. Rider originally saved the hog's life from being barbecued, and then the hog helped them run away from the giants. They realized how great of a team they could make, but before they could do anything else, the village chief along with the entire village army came running out, ambushing the hog and Rider. Rider jumped onto the hog and they were about to take off running, but right before, the chief yelled out, "Wait, we just want to talk." So Hog and Rider stayed and heard him out. The chief told them a short story about all the difficulties their army has been having with getting over the walls. All about how the wall breakers are too stupid and just blow themselves up against the nearest wall no matter where that wall is, and how giants take forever to destroy the walls. Not to mention that the alchemists weren't able to upgrade their spell factory to start brewing the jump spell. So you two make a great team, and have something that our army desperately needs. So if you're interested, we'd like to have both of you join our army. The Hog and Rider looked at each other, and then Rider said, "We have a few demands that we want." And the chief replied with, "What kinds of demands?" The Healer is one of the 10 original troops that were in Clash of Clans when it was very first released to the world. She is a strong support troop at the mid-tier town halls like Town Hall 7 and Town Hall 8, where she is great at helping keep alive giants for much longer. Then once moved on to Town Hall 9 and above, she is most known for her role that she plays in Queen Walk attacks, where they stick to her like glue and do their best to ensure that she doesn't die. The Healer is likely the most unique troop in all of Clash of Clans, as she is the only support troop in the village. She does no damage, and by herself she is useless. However, add her to most armies, and she can change the entire outcome of the battle. Being a support troop, she is often forgotten or not given enough credit, but in today's story, we're going to give her the spotlight, and I'll tell you my version of how the Healer came into the world of Clash. A very long time ago, back at the very beginning of Clash of Clans in 2012, all of the villagers were getting ready and preparing the village in anticipation for the grand opening of their village. It was a few days before the release date of August 2nd, 2012, and Clash of Clans was going to open their doors to the entire world. So the builders were finishing the last of their buildings, the troops were getting their armor and weapons ready, and the villagers were making sure everything was running in tip-top shape. The next few days were a bit hectic as everyone was anxious to begin battling against other villages, and once the day finally came, everyone in the village went nuts, especially the barbarians. They literally could not wait to get into battle. Anyway, the barbarians and the rest of the troops left the village to go and attack their very first base ever. And while they went to go search for their first base, another village's army spotted their village and began closing in on it. As they prepared to attack the village, all of the builders and villagers ran into their builder huts or the town hall to save themselves. But for some reason, one single villager stopped outside of the town hall rather than going in. The rest of the villagers urged her to join them inside, but the villager refused. She told them that they would destroy our town hall with all of you guys inside. You'll all die. Now, of course this wasn't true, however, at the time, the villagers did not know this, and Aurora, the name of the villager who refused to go inside, stood outside the town hall as the doors were closed and locked shut. She turned around to face the oncoming army. She picked up a weapon off of the barracks weapon rack, and then the army quickly made work of the village, and after they finished off all of the village's last defenses, they approached the town hall. Aurora stood in front, guarding the town hall, quite pathetically might I add, and then the troops stopped before attacking, and humorously looked at Aurora, an unskilled and pathetic last defense to the town hall. Then nervously, Aurora yelled at the army, "Stop, or face my wrath." Then she started doing a bunch of practice kicks and tried her best to intimidate them with her combat skills. Obviously, none of this stunted the army for even a second. However, they did watch and laugh at the pathetic villager who was attempting to stop an entire army all by herself. After getting a really good laugh out of it, the army had finally had enough and decided it was time to just end it, since time was running out of the battle anyways. The army quickly marched forward and effortlessly took out Aurora. Unfortunately, unlike the rest of the troops in the village, villagers could actually be killed and were not able to be brought back to life through the barracks. And the rest of the villagers saw this from inside the town hall. They all screamed out, "No!" and couldn't believe she just sacrificed herself to protect all of them. And without having much time to dread on the death of their friend, the army continued to close in on the town hall. The rest of the villagers sadly accepted their fate. However, right before the army could make it to the town hall, they just turned around, and it turns out that the time limit for the battle had run out, and Aurora's attempt at intimidating them had distracted them long enough to save them from all being killed. So the rest of the villagers came running out and decided that they needed to have the most respectful and significant funeral ever for Aurora, who had sacrificed herself to save everyone else. So before the villagers' army had come back, the villagers and builders had dug a small grave and buried Aurora. They then said a few words about her bravery and how they will always respect and remember what she did for them. Then shortly after the funeral had ended, the village's army had returned home from their battles. They were all in very high spirits as they had just won the majority of their battles. However, once they got closer to all of the villagers and builders who were all gathered around, they sensed a bit of sad and depressing vibes. So the wizard asked what was going on. One of the villagers told the wizard how Aurora had sacrificed herself to save everyone else, and now they had buried her in respect for what she did. The wizard looked at them and told them, you guys do know that even if they do destroy the town hall, you guys are all safe, right? I put a special spell on the basement of the town hall so that you guys will all be safe no matter what happens to the town hall. All of the villagers and builders looked around anxiously at each other, thinking it sure would have been nice to know this beforehand. So now it turned out that Aurora's sacrifice had been in vain. However, at the time, Aurora, like all the others, believed that they were not safe, and yet she still willingly sacrificed herself. All of the other troops would forever remember Aurora for her selfless act in sacrificing herself with the thought of saving everyone else. And then the next day, a bunch of trees that had never been there before had sprouted up in the middle of the Clash of Clans village. The troops all saw this as a small sign, that these trees had grown due to Aurora, who had been buried and a part of the ground. So all of the villagers thought that Aurora's spirit had spread to the ground and sprouted a bunch of plants, and every time a new tree or something would sprout, or any time they would walk by a tree, they would stand there and applaud the tree or Aurora's spirit as a small way to say thank you for her sacrifice. And that's why you can still see, to this day, villagers going around randomly clapping at trees. The passing of Aurora caused a tough time for all of the troops in the village. They were all extremely distraught and upset that one of the most selfless troops in the entire village was now gone forever. It was terribly sad, but unfortunately there was no good way of bringing her back. Not to mention, back at the beginning of Clash there was no witch, so resurrecting Aurora wasn't even an option. The troops in the village felt extremely sad and helpless as there was nothing that they could do, except pray for Aurora. So all of the troops prayed and wished for Aurora to be brought back, but nothing worked. Then one day, the wizard mentioned how whenever he had to make spells, he had to sacrifice or get rid of something into the spell to make it work. And he suggested that maybe it worked in a similar way for praying to the leprechous gods, where they would have to make some sacrifices. All of the troops thought that the wizard's logic made sense, so they all began gathering some items and such to sacrifice. Some of the troops decided to grab a large boulder that was in the middle of the base and added that to the altar where they set on fire and destroyed the items. The rock didn't burn until they got 10 dragons to simultaneously breathe fire onto it at the same time. And after the rock was successfully sacrificed, the wizard came by and told the troops, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that the more powerful the items you sacrifice, the more likely the gods will be able to hear you. So sacrificing a rock probably won't help too much." But it was too late, the rock was already gone. And that is actually the reason as to why that particular rock is no longer in the game anymore. So the troops regrouped and decided to try sacrificing some other stuff. For example, the wizards gave away their spellbook that would have allowed them to cast spells other than just a fireball. The giant sacrificed his little cannon that he used to hold beside him. Even the goblins gave away all of their stashes of gold. That was just how badly everyone wanted Aurora to be given a second chance at life. They all brought their sacrifices to the altar by the campfire that was closest to the water, and then they began burning all of their sacrifices. They then ushered a little prayer under their breath, asking the leprechous gods to bring Aurora back to life. Thankfully, it was a quieter day, and the leprechous gods were able to hear their prayer. Unfortunately though, they couldn't simply just bring Aurora back to life, otherwise the villagers would expect this anytime any important troop died. And so rather than just snapping their fingers and poofing Aurora back into the village as if nothing had ever happened, instead they decided that they would have to resurrect her, but not as her old self, but rather as something new, something that represented exactly what she stood for, and something that the rest of the troops could look up to her for. So when the leprechous gods resurrected her, they turned her into an angel, to represent how selfless and caring she was. And to top off the angel look, they gave her 2 angelic wings so that she could fly around freely. But the biggest part that they added for her was a special power, where they gave her a special healing power so that she was selfless and always trying to protect and help others, like when she sacrificed herself for the rest of the villagers. So shortly after all of the troops finished their sacrifices, they all looked to the sky in anticipation for the leprechous gods to grant their wish. So they sat there and waited, but for a little while nothing happened. They were just staring at a blank sky. But then finally, after the leprechous gods were finally done resurrecting Aurora, she came floating down from the sky in front of all the awaiting troops. Aurora greeted the rest of the troops as they all stood there with their mouths hung open, not believing that this actually worked. Aurora was welcomed back into the Clash of Clans village with open arms and was almost praised as a hero. And no more was she just a regular old villager. After showing her bravery in battle, the village chief asked her if she would like to join the army. But not to fight, but instead to use her new healing powers to help keep her fellow troops alive. Aurora agreed to help. She figured now that she has all these amazing abilities, she may as well use them for the good of the army. So she ended up joining the army, where she would shoot her magical beams of healing towards her friendly troops. She was obviously beloved by all and everyone's favorite to have in the army camp with them. And then not only was she loved in attacks, but she was also helpful back at the village, where she would use her abilities to help the wizard make some heal spells, so that when she wasn't able to be in the attack with the army, they would still be able to use some of her healing abilities. And not only did she help the wizard make heal spells, but also she acted as the village doctor, where she would treat all of the troops' injuries, big or small, whenever they needed them. And things went on like this for a very long time, where the healer was the backbone of many attacks, whether it be keeping big groups of troops alive or keeping the most valuable hero, the Archer Queen, alive during battles. And that there is the story on how the healer was brought into the world of Clash. One of the first ever troops in Clash of Clans and the newest troop added into the Clash Royale arenas is the Wallbreaker, a single skeleton who seems way too overly attached to its bomb. So how was this OG troop brought into the world of Clash, and how did he end up making it to the Clash Royale arenas? Here is the Clash of Clans and Clash Royale crossover story on the Wallbreaker's origin story. The story of the Wallbreaker actually starts off with a barbarian named Scully. Back in the village, the barracks was working overtime, pumping out hundreds of troops as fast as it could. The chief had ordered the army to train up a barge attack, so the village was getting pretty hectic since there were so many troops. The barracks was transforming the elixir that was produced from the pumps into the troops using some sort of special magic produced by the wizards. Anyway, amongst those, hundreds of barbarians and archers were produced. Scully was one of them. And then briefly after Scully was created, the chief ordered the troops to battle, since he was gemming the barracks and he wanted to get the most out of the boost. So the barbarians and archers marched off to battle, and decided to attack the very first base that they came across. Unfortunately, the first base that they came across was a whole town hall above theirs, and they were seriously outmatched. The battle went pretty much as anyone would have expected, where all the barbarians and archers barely made a dent in the base. It was coming down to the end of the battle, and as the troops were picking off all the outside buildings, they were actually coming surprisingly close to getting a 1-star at 50%. The chief was holding on to Scully and a few other archers to hopefully clean up any final buildings in case they needed it. And near the end of the battle, all other troops had been killed. They turned into elixir and sunk into the ground of the battlefield. The army had cleared 48% of all buildings, and now it was up to just Scully to take out 2 more buildings to bring home the win. There was one building on the outside of the walls still that he could finish off, and one more right inside the walls with no defenses anywhere close to it. It was foolproof. So the chief deployed Scully on the outside building, and he took that out with ease, 49% and 1% more to go. Then Scully made his way to the other defense, but instead of running around the walls to the opening, he decided to try and destroy the wall instead. It was a dumb mistake and a costly one too, because right beside the wall was a bomb. Scully wound up getting stuck on that wall for so long that it gave the bomb enough time to charge up and explode on him before he could get to that last building. Scully's stupid mistake of attacking that wall instead of going around costed him his life and the village the win. Scully evaporated into elixir immediately and then sunk into the ground. And the next day, the witch came by and raised the fallen troops as she usually does, and they rose out of the ground as skeletons. But there was one troop that stuck out amongst the rest. That skeleton was Scully, because he was carrying a bomb with him as well. It turned out that the Clash gods had cursed him for losing the battle for his village, and now he would not be able to ever let go of that very bomb that had killed him. His life source basically was connected to that bomb that took his life, so if he ever let go, he would die again. Scully was obviously not happy about this burden that he now carried, and the fact that he had to carry around a giant heavy bomb with him everywhere. So he carried a bit of a grudge against a wall piece. Scully was so pissed off by the fact that he let the village down, and that it was a single wall that got in his way, that he wanted nothing more than to get revenge on that wall. So the very next battle, without the chief knowing, Scully tagged along in battle. He only had one goal in mind, and that was to get to that wall and destroy it. So once the battle had commenced, Scully waited for the other troops to take the front lines, and once the defenses were distracted, Scully started running. He dodged and weaved through many flying cannonballs and arrows, and he quickly dodged from the wizard's fireballs and merely missed by some mortar strikes. He continued to make his way closer to the wall, and somehow miraculously got right next to the wall. Still holding onto the bomb, he sat there as he lit the bomb. Scully felt a small feeling of relief as he felt that he had redeemed himself for his past failure. Then a few seconds later the bomb went off, and the wall was blown into oblivion. Watching this from a distance, the chief was shocked at what he just saw, a single skeleton who just wiped out an entire small row of walls. The chief was super impressed and wanted Scully to permanently join the village's army. Scully, who was just brought back to life again after the battle, since he was just a skeleton, later agreed to join as this would provide him with an opportunity to further make up for his failures, where the army would rely on him to open up paths for them, and also he would be able to continuously get revenge on the walls. This was great for Scully as he enjoyed what he was doing. He got constant revenge on the walls, the army relied on him, plus he made up for his mistake. Life was good, and based off what he was doing, he was now called the Wallbreaker too, which he liked as well. And the new Wallbreaker in Clash of Clans got to do this for a long time, but all good things must come to an end, because after a few years the Wallbreaker's abilities were no longer needed as badly. With new additions of the jump spell and then the earthquake spells, it started to take away from the demand for the Wallbreaker. But that was okay. Scully still got some decent usage rates, and he was still happy with that. But where things really went sideways was when the builder created the Wallwrecker, which just by the sounds of it sounded way better than the Wallbreaker. So once the Wallwrecker was added, the Wallbreaker had enough. There was nothing left for him in Clash of Clans. So he finally decided to make his way over to the Clash Royale arenas with the rest of the troops, and he went to go battle there. For the first bit, it was difficult for the Wallbreaker to adjust, but to fix that, he simply started visualizing that the King's Towers were just other pieces of walls that he wanted to destroy. And then he had no problem running full speed at it and blowing himself up. And that there is the story of how the Wallbreaker was brought into the world of Clash. This is a fan fiction story about the Goblin King and his horde, as well as a brand new, never before seen troop known as a Reptilian. The Reptilian is a fan-made concept done by Vovson. To see its stats and what it does, check out my most recent video or head over to Vov's channel. Vov also reached out to me asking me to make a story on this troop, and despite this not being an actual troop within the game, it does help to explain the theoretical origin of the goblins, the minions, the goblin horde, and the Goblin King. I hope you guys enjoy this story, as Vov and I both put a lot of time into creating this troop and the story. So anyways, let's get into this story. Since the beginning of Clash of Clans, there has been a group of goblins living peacefully in the forest close to the village. For many generations, they lived alongside a group known as the Reptilians. Together, they made a pretty good team, since the Reptilians were skilled hunters and the goblins were extremely good at gathering edible plants. They were an ideal hunter-gatherer tribe. So as time went on, generations passed, and it came to a point where the head chief of the goblin tribe had peacefully passed away, and a new chief named Gollum stepped up to take his place, and his very first order of business was to be referred to as king from now on. At first, no one really bothered too much about it since it didn't really affect anyone, but slowly as time went on, the Goblin King began getting more and more strict, and demanding more and more. He became obsessed by being king, and started craving riches of all kinds to prove his power. To satisfy his craving, he began ordering his goblins to steal and bring him gold and other valuable resources. And the king kept getting more and more corrupt. He kept demanding more and more as time went on, and his goblins started to become corrupt as well, following his orders for so long that they were starting to become greedy just like him. As all of this was happening, the Reptilians noticed the corruption within the goblin tribe, so they had collectively decided to distance themselves from them. The group of Reptilians had hiked all the way to the other side of the island, and once they set up their little camp, after the long hike, they all were pooped, so they went to sleep for the night. Then the next day when they woke up to go hunting for their food, they came across a tiny lake full of black liquid. One of the Reptilians told everyone, "I know what this is. I remember eavesdropping on the Clash of Clans village and overheard the Barbarian King talking about how some black liquid turned him into an immortal Barbarian King." So all of the Reptilians thought that if they drank it as well, they would become immortal just like him. However, what they didn't hear is that there needs to be an electrical impulse in order to fully complete the transformation. So without knowing that, the group of Reptilians began to drink all of the dark elixir from the tiny lake. Unfortunately, the lake was so small that not all of the Reptilians could get some dark elixir to drink. Only about half of them did. So once they drained the entire lake, they all got out. Then, about half the reptilians began to transform. Tiny little bulges began to protrude from their shoulders, and their entire bodies began to morph into a slightly different form. Then finally, when the transformations had finished, there was a brand new flying reptilian that was standing before the rest of the regular reptilians. These new flying troops became so dependent on the Dark Elixir that they couldn't go very long without having any. And the only place that they could find any more dispensable Dark Elixir was at the Clash of Clans village. So when they got to the village, the chief offered them a deal. He would give them between 6 to 12 drops of Dark Elixir, depending on how strong they were, and in exchange they would go do all of the village's bidding. So the flying reptilians who desperately needed the Dark Elixir accepted the extremely low offer of Dark Elixir and in return aided in attacks for the village chief. And since these flying reptilians were doing all of the village's bidding, the villagers began to refer to them as minions. Then back in the forest, a new war was beginning to stir between the goblin horde and the reptilian gang. A conflict that could change the course of history forever for the world of Clash. After half of the reptilians had turned into minions and left to join the village, the rest of them were forced to go back to their original camp with the goblin horde, since there wasn't enough resources and supplies in their new area. During that time, a group of goblins had escaped the Goblin King's wrath and gone to the village looking for work. The village chief took them in exchange for their help in battles. When the reptilians got back to the goblin camp, they noticed that there were no goblins there anymore. Their campfire was still going though, and their pile of treasure was still there as well. They figured that the goblins were just out gathering more resources or something like that. But shortly after, the group of goblins came back with loads of golden gems. While they were away, they had gone and raided the Clash of Clans village, but the attack that they sent on the village was merely a diversion for their real heist. While the village and chief were busy defending the attack, the rest of the goblins raided the village and stole most of their gold and over 2,000 gems. Now normally when starting a new game, you get 500 gems for free at the start, but originally it was supposed to be 2,500 gems, but thanks to the goblin horde, they stole all of that away from us. When the reptilian found out about this, they were just as angered as the villagers, so angry that they confronted the Goblin King and insisted that they return all of his stolen resources. But being the greedy Goblin King that he was, he ordered his goblin army to get rid of the reptilians. The goblins pushed the reptilians away and forced them to retreat. So the next day, the reptilians regrouped and declared war against the goblins. And for quite some time, the goblins and reptilians were so caught up in their fight that the goblins were not able to raid the village anymore. The reptilians were, in a way, protecting the village from them. And as time went on, the fight was still going on strong. The goblins, who outnumbered the reptilians, were starting to take control of the war and were days away from beating the reptilians. But luckily, the Clash of Clans village was progressing very quickly and was already a max Town Hall 6, ready to upgrade to Town Hall 7. And a few days later, after the completion of the Town Hall upgrade, the goblins finally forced the reptilians to retreat. They escaped to the village and confronted the village chief. They explained to him everything that was happening, how they were defending the village from the goblins, and then to this, the king was very grateful and was determined to repay the reptilians for their deed. So in return, he did his absolute best to wipe out the goblins by taking out their bases one by one and stealing back some of their precious resources. Until one day, they finally made it to the Goblin King's hideout, where they successfully crushed his base and took him out for good. As for the reptilians, as a way of repaying them and saying thank you, he offered them a place in his village and was offered to fight alongside the rest of their army for a small price of regular elixir. The reptilians gladly accepted his offer and then continued to fight for the village. And perhaps if you want the more realistic story, since these troops are not actually in the game, you could just pretend that the reptilians just went back into the jungle or forest to live their everyday normal lives. Whichever story ending you would prefer, just go ahead and choose that one. July 29th, 2013. It was another regular day in the Clash of Clans village. Troops were just coming back from a hard day of training and battling, and were heading to the village bar. The bar was run by a group of wizards who were also the village alchemists. As the troops started to pour into the bar, a witch came in behind everyone else, and she seemed to be dragging herself through the door. She sat down in the nearest seat, and then one of the wizards came over to see what she wanted to drink. She replied with, "I'll have the same as always." So the wizard went to go fetch some dark elixir. When he got back, the witch looked even more upset than before, so naturally he asked her what the matter was. She told him that she was having a really hard time fitting in with the rest of the army. They were all super strong like the barbarians, or tanky like the giant, or talented like the wizards, or they have some super special feature like the healer. But there was nothing special about her. She could hardly do any damage, and she didn't have a lot of health either, and she had no special ability as well. The wizard looked at her and then told her to wait here for 1 second. He grabbed her drink of dark elixir and then ran off to the laboratory to grab the rage spell, so that the witch can become bigger, better, faster, and stronger. When the wizard got to the laboratory, he grabbed what he thought was the rage spell and poured it into the witch's dark elixir drink. What he didn't know is that he accidentally grabbed the wrong potion. Without paying too much attention, he grabbed the skeleton spell by accident and mixed it with the witch's drink. So without knowing, he brought the drink back to the witch and she drank it all in one big gulp. Immediately, she felt the spell taking effect. She could feel some new superpower inside of her, and she stood up and raised her staff, and then from the floor emerged 5 skeletons. After this, the witch quickly became one of the coolest troops in the game. She was the only troop at the time that could spawn other troops to fight for her, and a lot of people might have thought that she was the most powerful troop in the game. But that's only because they haven't met her sister yet, the Night Witch. Want to see how the Night Witch came into the world of Clash? Check out Adobo Flash to see the second part of the story and find out how the Night Witch was created. Many years later, when the witch had gone over to the Clash Royale arena when it first opened, she began dueling against all sorts of other troops. She fought against barbarians, minions, and even baby dragons. This was also her first time witnessing all of these different spells in action that the wizards had created. There were fireballs smashing troops, lightning spells frying troops, and huge rockets that crushed just about any troop it could reach. The witch wasn't very powerful in the arena, compared to where she dominated back in the Clash of Clans village. However, she was still a solid troop. Her attack did hardly any damage, and her skeletons were incredibly fragile and died to literally almost anything. So most of the time, players wouldn't even bother bringing her with them into battle. However, one game, a new king who was still very new to the Clash Royale arena decided to bring the witch into battle. During the battle, he was getting absolutely destroyed since his army sort of sucked, and he didn't know what they were doing. And out of rage, the king played every single card he had. So he played the witch and then some bats, and then he spammed every single spell card that he had right on top of her. He dropped a clone, a rage, a zap, and finally a heal spell. This overload of spells started to make the ground smoke, and then both kings were shocked to see some sort of transformation happening through the smoke. The smoke was taking a while to go away, so the king dropped a tornado spell to blow the smoke away. And once the smoke went away, the king saw that the bats had disappeared. But when they looked more closely, they noticed that they didn't actually disappear. They had just merged with the witch. Now, a whole new troop was standing in front of them, the witch combined with the bats. They decided to call her the Night Witch. Now, instead of spawning skeletons, she could summon bats to fight for her. She was so powerful that the Clash of Clans village also wanted to use the Night Witch, so the Clash Royale kings simply cloned her, using the clone spell, then sent her by boat over to the Clash of Clans village. One of the newest and most powerful troops in Clash of Clans, and a 5 elixir solid area splash card in Clash Royale, the bowler in both games is a big blue dude that carries around his boulder, and as his name suggests, he bowls that rock and flattens whoever or whatever it hits. Weird enough though, in Clash of Clans the bowler's rock bounces, but in Clash Royale he simply rolls the boulder. So why is that? Here is the complete origin story of how the bowler came into the world of Clash. Back on March 21st, 2016, in the Clash of Clans village, one of the giant's long-lost cousins showed up on the shores next to the Clash of Clans village. Like the giant, this guy was a big and strong-looking dude, and wore only a tiny cloth. But despite their similarities, there was one massive difference. He was bright blue. But when this new big blue guy arrived at the village, he claimed that he was from a nearby island, and his tribe lent him this boat to travel the seas in search of their other ancestors. Which he then said that he thinks he finally found them as he looked straight at the giants. The boat that he used to get there was then stored by the village chief and would be saved and wouldn't be used again until the wizard and Hog Rider would take it a year later in search of the builder base. So anyway, as the new blue troop was getting settled into his new village, he often hung out a lot with the giants. And something that the new blue troop wasn't expecting when he came to the new village was to be one of the smaller and weaker troops there, since back home he was the biggest, strongest, and fastest at everything, but now standing next to the giants that simply was not the case. And in a competitive spirit, the big blue guy wanted to figure out something that he was better than the giants at. And coincidentally enough, there was a new character who had just come to the village as well, the bearded strongman, who many of you guys may now know as the clan games guy. However, back in 2016, he was still testing out and experimenting with the clan games, and as a great opportunity for the clan games guy, he offered to host a mini clan games between the bowler and giant to see who was better, and if the blue guy could even beat the giant in any event. So for the first challenge was a simple race, and the giant won by a long shot, despite some questionable spells being used, but nonetheless the giant was awarded the win. Next was a strength contest, where both troops went up against a cannon, and effortlessly again the giant won. And this went on and on and on, where the giant kept whooping the blue guy's butt in every event, until finally the final event came up. It was a shot put contest. And since the two troops that were competing were absolutely massive, they had to use large rocks rather than small shot put balls. So the giant went first and tried to pick up one of the large boulders laying around on the village. However, once he tried to pick it up, he just couldn't get it out of the ground. It was way too heavy. So finally having a chance to win an event, the bowler went over to one of the stranger looking boulders and picked it up with ease. This boulder was one of the rare ones that could only be found in the early days of Clash, and the boulder was made from something completely different, and was actually incredibly light, at least by giant standards. So the big blue guy picked it up and gave it a toss, and instead of just landing, the boulder actually bounced before coming to a stop. And not only was the boulder really light, but it was also super bouncy, thanks to whatever elements or magic made up the rock. So the bowler won that event by a mile and finally found something that he had done better than the giant. So he decided to stick with it and become the best rock thrower the village had ever seen, since it was the only thing he was better than the giants at. And so he did. He even got a special rock carved out to be a perfect sphere with 3 finger holes. And a lot of the villagers noticed that with him throwing the boulder around like he does, he kind of looked like he was bowling. So naturally, they decided to call him the bowler. But then a few months later, on April 7th, 2016, the bowler made his first appearance in the Clash Royale arena, except for some reason there weren't enough special boulders to take with him to the arena. So instead he had to settle for a regular boulder. He could still throw this boulder well enough, however it was so much heavier that he had to throw it with 2 hands, and instead of throwing it, he more so rolled it along the ground, since it didn't bounce like the other boulder used to. And that there is the story on how the bowler came into the world of Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. The builder is without a doubt one of the most underrated troops inside of the Clash of Clans village, constantly working behind the scenes to ensure our villages run smoothly, and also constantly working on and improving our village defenses to take out any attackers who dare challenge our bases. By adding fire to our cannons or extra wattage to our Teslas, or just hotter flames to our Inferno Towers, the builder has always found a way to step up his game and make the defenses just that much more powerful. He's been able to improve each building somehow every time he upgrades it, usually by adding extra damage, or for other buildings it unlocks something new. However, there is this one building that whenever he upgrades it, nothing is added to it other than a new look. From an orange town hall to a black town hall, all the way to a red one and a whitish one. Nothing changes about the town hall except for the color and look. Other than the looks, the town hall acts the exact same. At least, until now. Now the town hall has a built-in super weapon that gets better and better as you add stars to it. So what happened to change the builder's mind on his way of upgrading the town hall? Here is the story on the builder's new secret weapon. For over 5 years, the builder has been upgrading the town hall in the exact same manner, every single year. However, very recently, the builder had a change of heart. So let's start back at the beginning. A few weeks ago, before the summer update, it was another regular day in the village. The builder had just finished upgrading the very last archer tower to max level for their Town Hall 11, and he was walking back to his builder hut when he passed by the town hall. He looked up at it and admired it. He had a really special place in his heart for the town hall, even though it didn't really do anything. It was the heart of the village and also the builder's prized possession. It was the very first building the builder had ever created in his life, and for that reason it was also his favorite and most important building. Anyway, as he continued to his builder hut, an incoming army had begun their attack on the village, so the builder had rushed over to his builder hut to hide from the attack. And from his builder hut, he sat and watched the attack unfold. He watched as the village was torn to ruins by a powerful army, and all that was left standing was his precious town hall. And then he had to watch as the defenseless town hall was decimated by the rest of the army. Once the army collected their loot and left, the builder emerged from his builder hut and walked over to the town hall. He searched through the rubble and looked extremely upset about what had just happened. Even though the village getting 3-starred was nothing new to the village, it was still very painful to the builder to watch his prized building get destroyed like that. And as he was thinking that, he also thought back to a few years ago, back when the village would purposely leave the town hall outside of the walls for something called farming. It was as if the village didn't share the same view of importance that the town hall held. It just seemed like they didn't care. But anyway, he didn't let it bother him too much and he moved on. The village naturally repaired itself as it always does, and then the builder noticed the master builder's towboat on the beach. The master builder was just getting off to start an upgrade on the new geared up multi-mortar. And the master builder walked right past the builder and then began working on his new multi-mortar upgrade. The builder saw the towboat as an opportunity to visit the brand new island known as the builder's base. The builder had never been there before since he had always been stuck in the regular village, but since he no longer had any upgrades left to do, he decided what the heck and went for it. Plus, he doubted anyone would notice anyway since they were all occupied with their own things. So, he took the boat all the way to the other village, and once he got there, he saw some incredible new buildings that he had never seen before. But above all, he noticed this giant pyramid-shaped defense that was apparently called the Mega Tesla. The builder loved the design and its abilities so much that he wanted to take it back to the village with him. So he quickly mapped out in his head how to recreate the Mega Tesla, and then he rushed back to the village before the master builder could finish his mortar gear up. As soon as the builder got back, he quickly got to work trying to create the prototype for his version of the Mega Tesla. Unfortunately though, once he did create the Mega Tesla, there was absolutely no room on the village where he could fit it. There was already way too many buildings on the available area. But then the builder thought back to what he had noticed earlier that day, where the town hall was left completely defenseless against an army. And then he looked over at the master builder working on the mortar gear up, and then it hit him all at once. He would create the very first ever town hall gear up. So during the next 15 days, the builder was hard at work trying to find a way to cram the entirety of the Mega Tesla into the town hall. Eventually he was able to, and he was even able to add in the hidden Tesla effect, where it is hidden until an enemy comes close enough and attacks it. And to avoid any copycat claims from the master builder, he decided to name his new town hall defense the Giga Tesla instead of the Mega Tesla. And as happy as the new builder was with his geared up town hall, he wasn't quite satisfied yet. He then continued to evolve the town hall and add extra add-ons to it. Each time he added something, the new town hall defense got better and better. And about 4 upgrades in, he remembered something else he had seen on the builder's base. He recalled overseeing the Super P.E.K.K.A in action, where when he died, he exploded into a mini supernova. And he thought to himself if he would be able to incorporate something that powerful into the town hall as well. And then he thought that of course he could do that. It's pretty much the same thing as the bomb tower. So as the ultimate geared up defense in the entire 2 villages, he combined the power of the town hall with the Tesla, the Mega Tesla, the bomb tower, and creating the builder's ultimate secret weapon known as Town Hall 12. The Ice Golem, the newest addition to our Clash of Clans villages, is a tanky defense targeting troop very similar to the regular Golem, but other than that, it is nothing like the regular Golem. For starters, the Ice Golem costs half as much housing space as the regular Golem, but not only that, it also freezes and slows defenses down as he attacks. And then when he dies, instead of splitting into 2 smaller Golemites, it fully freezes everything around it, covering a larger area than that of a regular freeze spell. It is also quite different from the Ice Golem in Clash Royale, in the sense that it is much larger, more powerful. So why is that? I'll do my best to explain all of that in today's video. So without further ado, here is the story of how the Ice Golem made it into the world of Clash. It was the beginning of winter, snow was beginning to fall in the Clash of Clans villages, and villages were starting to get a bit busier thanks to the all new upgrades and content in the village. Troops were super busy being trained to take on the new and improved Goblin Horde. Who knows where they came from and why they're back, especially after the village crushed their last base a long time ago. But nonetheless, there were more villages for the village to conquer, and not only were there more Goblin Horde bases, but the village was also now participating in a brand new thing called Clan War Leagues. Plus, this was all on top of the regular raiding and wars that the village was already doing on a regular. So this meant that the troops were extremely busy and constantly rushing around the village. So today's story is going to follow a troop that doesn't usually get too much love inside of these stories or videos, but today's story is going to follow around a golem named Rocky. Being a golem, Rocky is in high demand for the many battles that the village takes part in on it daily. So one day, after many long weeks of battling the new and improved Goblin Horde, The village was gathering its best army to take down the final goblin base. It was going to be an incredibly tough battle, as not only did they have to take on numerous fully maxed out defenses, but also a never before seen mega golden dragon. So a part of the specially planned army included Rocky as one of the main parts of the army. Unfortunately, the perfectly planned attack did not go quite to plan, and the troops took a massive beating. The village chief seriously underestimated the power of the mega golden dragon, as it single-handedly wiped out the entire village's army. Of course, the golem was so distracted on tanking for all the other troops that he didn't even notice the rest of the army being taken out by the golden dragon. So after the majority of the army had been taken out, the village chief quickly surrendered and had the remaining troops retreat. Unfortunately, Rocky was so busy distracting all of those defenses that the defenses ended up taking him out and splitting him into two smaller golemites. The golemites were now named after the original golem, so it was now Rocky and Balboa. Anyway, the remainder of the army retreated and Rocky and Balboa both followed suit. The army got back to the village. They all walked back through the village all the way to the army camps with their heads hung down low. Meanwhile, back in the village, the builder was setting up the newest technological advancements in the village, the tornado trap. He was in the middle of upgrading it from level 1 to 2, so he set up his wooden barrier as per usual to tell troops to keep out during construction. But while Rocky and Balboa were both walking back to the army camps, they accidentally stumbled through the weak wooden fence and wound up setting off the tornado trap. The tornado trap spun the two golemites around for a few seconds before flinging them to one side. Rocky and Balboa were lucky that their fall was broken by landing in water, except when they looked around them, they realized that they weren't actually in water. Instead, they had landed inside of the spell factory, where a new batch of free spell was being brewed. Unfortunately, since they were made out of rock, they couldn't get out of the spell factory bowl since they would just sink straight to the bottom. No one had seen them get thrown into the spell factory as the builders were too busy upgrading and there weren't many troops left after the previous battle. So not to mention that the golems couldn't talk since, well, they were golems. So they ended up sitting in the spell bowl for a few minutes while the mixture was created and heated up. Then after the batch of spell was finished brewing, it began to empty out the contents as it usually does into the portable spell bottles. Except when it was pouring out, something landed on the ground that crushed the empty spell bottle and landed with a thud. Standing in front of the spell factory was a single large stone troop that glowed a light blue, bluish-white color. It turned out that the spell being brewed was a free spell, and when the spell was being heated to combine all the ingredients, they ended up fusing the two golemites together to create a slightly larger golemite, but still half the size of a regular golem. Not only did it fuse the two golemites together, but it also mixed the free spell with the new golem. The golem felt a bit different, but he didn't have much time to observe himself since the chief was calling all troops for the next battle. The new golem hurried over and then they went on to attack the next base. During the battle, the new golem noticed that the free spell that had mixed with him was sort of released in moderation whenever he attacked a building, so it would slow down that defense with every single hit. And then when he eventually died, the big batch of free spell inside of him would drop, releasing a massive ice nova over the surrounding area. Basically, a super large free spell was dropped, because not only did the new ice golem mix with a free spell, but he mixed with the entire batch of free spells. And to this day, the ice golem is freezing our opponents in a chilling style, and joining our armies at the most appropriate time, just when it started snowing in our villages. So that there is the story of how the ice golem was created in the world of Clash, but as many of you know, there is also an ice golem in Clash Royale that is a miniature version of the ice golem in Clash of Clans, but I'll save that story for another time. And if you guys really do want to see that, then leave a comment down below and like the video. Also, let me know if an origin story on the Golden Dragon would be something that interests you, as I know that was added really recently into Clash of Clans, and I didn't actually have enough time to make a story on that back then. But if you guys still do want to see that, let me know in the comments and drop a like. Clash of Clans is nearly 5 years old, and since then, many mysteries have already been uncovered, like the story of how the Barbarian and Archer became the Barbarian King and the Archer Queen, how the Builder ended up in Clash Royale, and what happened to the Wizard and Hog Rider after they set sail for a new island. But there is another mystery still yet to be uncovered. That is, until now. Today we will take a look at the origin of the Builders, as well as how the P.E.K.K.A. was created. Over 5 years ago, back at the beginning of Clash, there were two new troops just introduced to the village. These two troops both happened to be dwarves, and they were brothers. The younger brother's name was Bill, and his older brother's name was Dirk. These two were extremely competitive with each other, always competing to see who was the better brother. They would compete to see who could run faster, who could build better things, and even who had a bigger hammer. They would compete for literally everything. Anyways, during their first day in the village chief was asking to see what they could do in battle. So they were both sent into battle, where there were barbarians, balloons, dragons, goblins, and archers all fighting around them. Bill and Dirk felt way out of place, and quickly realized that they had no fighting abilities and were basically just standing bait. They had talents in other places though, like building things, and since building something wasn't going to save their lives in the middle of this battle, they quickly jumped out of the way and hid in a bush until the battle was over. When the battle had finished, all the troops around them had turned into a purple liquid known as elixir, whereas the two brothers did not. They returned to their village and approached the chief. When the chief saw them, his jaw hung open. He had never witnessed troops come back from a battle before. This was a first. But he wasn't so much impressed as he was furious. He scolded them for being cowards and not fighting with the rest of the army. He even blamed them for being the reason that they didn't get the 3-star. The builders felt awful, and the chief was furious. So the brothers offered to make it up to the chief for supposedly losing the battle for their village. So they offered to build him something that could help. The chief allowed this, but told them that they had until sunset. Otherwise, they will both be exiled off the island. So both brothers got to work, attempting to create their best creation yet. And by the time sunset came, they both met the chief outside of his town hall. And then the chief asked Bill to present his creation first. So Bill brought forward a shiny blue piece of armor. And when Bill explained what it was, he said, "Since I cannot fight in battles for you, I created something that can. I present to you the builder's personal electronic killing night assistant, or for short, the Bibka." Then the builder flicked a switch on its back and the Bibka came to life. He showed what the Bibka could do. It was the strongest troop the chief had ever seen. He could swing hard enough to send barbarians flying, and its armor was built out of the strongest materials that could be found on the island. And the king was extremely impressed, and after he got over the amazing new creation by Bill, he asked Dirk to bring forth his creation. So Dirk unveiled his brand new defense. He called it the Crusher. Sadly, the chief did not look too impressed, and he said, "So you're telling me that your younger brother created an artificially intelligent mechanical robot with super strength, and you made me a giant rock that goes up and down?" After realizing how stupid that sounded, Dirk looked down and agreed. The chief was so disappointed in Dirk that he exiled him into an abandoned island a long ways away. And Dirk spent almost 5 years taking a power nap, trying to sleep off how mad he was that he got kicked off the island while his younger brother got to stay. He swore that one day he would get his revenge, but until then, he went back to sleep. And back to the home village. Even though the chief was furious at Dirk, he was still awestruck at Bill's new Bubka, but he said there was one tiny problem: the name. He said he had to change it because it sounded really stupid. So Bill suggested, how about just Pekka? The chief approved and was so amazed at Bill's building talents that he named him the village builder. Bill continued to build new structures for the chief and continued to upgrade his greatest creation, the Pekka, making it more and more powerful as time went on. Life was pretty good. Bill got to build things all day, every day, which he loved doing. But as time went on, Bill started getting tired of doing the same thing day in and day out. But the chief continued to force him to work. So the builder had to do something about it. Last episode, we found out about the origin of the builders and how the original P.E.K.K.A. was created. But there are still 2 more versions of the P.E.K.K.A. that are still unanswered for. So this is going to be the story of how the mini P.E.K.K.A. and super P.E.K.K.A. were brought into this world of Clash. And in case you missed the last episode, here is a very quick recap. Bill and Dirk were both dwarves added to the game. However, they both did not know how to fight. So to please the village chief, they both tried to create something that could really impress the chief. Bill created what is now known as the P.E.K.K.A., and Dirk created what is now known as the Crusher. The chief was extremely disappointed in Dirk's creation that he exiled him off the island, and Bill ended up becoming the village's official builder. However, after years of working for the cruel chief, he started to regret making the choice to become the village's builder. And now for the continuation. Welcome back. So even though the builder didn't like his job in the village, he decided to put up with it for the time being. But the thing that really got him through this was the fact that he learned how to clone himself and create 4 other builders. But we'll explain that in another story. As the years went on, he continued to do the same old job day in and day out. However, about 5 years later, he finally reached his boiling point. But first, let's head over to where the other builder, Dirk, was exiled. After almost 4.5 years, Dirk finally woke up from his extremely long slumber and realized that he was on some mysterious island. Even though he was sleeping for almost 5 years, he still clearly remembered how his brother showed him up and created some super cool new mechanical robot called a P.E.K.K.A. Even though Dirk was super impressed with his creation, he also felt super betrayed that he got exiled, whereas Bill, his brother, got to stay back in the main village. So Dirk promised himself that one day he will return to the village with the biggest and best creation the village has ever seen in their lives. But the only problem was that he still had to create this new super creation. He still didn't even know what he wanted to make. So first, he decided to make his house. He got to work and finished his first building, the Builder Hall. And once he was done creating that, he decided to create a laboratory as well, that he would use to create his new creation. However, after a few days, and even weeks, his mind was still blank, and he had no good ideas. But then one day, he had a flashback to when he got exiled. He remembered seeing his brother's creation, and how magnificent it looked. However, he felt that there was something missing to it. So then it hit him. I'll just create a bigger and better version of the P.E.K.K.A. So he quickly got to work gathering all the resources he could find, and he worked hours on end. He worked many days without even sleeping, so determined to finish his project. And then about 14 days later, he added the finishing touches to his creation. And then he went outside to await and see what the final product looked like. Then, out of the smoke emerged Dirk's version of the P.E.K.K.A. When it got out of the building collapsed behind him. This new creation was a powerhouse. 5 seconds after being born, he already destroyed a full building. Dirk could not have been happier. But then once the smoke settled down, a tiny blue metal robot came running out. This was no Mega P.E.K.K.A. This was just a tiny little mini P.E.K.K.A. Dirk's smile faded. He was no longer proud of himself. All he felt was a shameful feeling in his stomach. He was so ashamed of his mini P.E.K.K.A. And then weird enough, another mini P.E.K.K.A. came running out of the rubble. There were 2 mini P.E.K.K.A.s standing in front of Dirk. And then Dirk realized what must have happened. He had added enough materials to create a full-size P.E.K.K.A. But the laboratory's machinery must have had insignificant energy to combine them all. So instead of making one full-size P.E.K.K.A., it split them up into 2 mini P.E.K.K.A.s. Dirk was unsure of what to do, since he had no other way of getting more energy sources. And besides, the mini P.E.K.K.A. destroyed all of his equipment and his house. So he had nothing left, and all the trees in the forest were going to take years to grow back. So he decided to take his boat to a nearby village and hope for the best. When he got to a nearby island, the first thing that popped out at him was a giant arena where he could hear a roaring crowd inside. There was some sort of battle going on between 2 separate sides, the blue team and the red team. Dirk sat and watched the first match, and after the match was over, he confronted the king and asked him if he could spare any resources to build a new house and possibly supply any extra energy. The king replied asking what happened to his old home, and Dirk told him what had happened, how the mini P.E.K.K.A. destroyed his house and now they were homeless, and how he has no materials left to build a new house. The king, who was actually impressed by this, offered Dirk a deal. He said,
I'll tell you what, I will give you all of your necessary resources that you need for your house, and then I'll even triple that, and give you even more for any future projects you might have in mind. However, I do not have anything that can help you with your shortage of energy. And all I want in return is one of your mini P.E.K.K.A.s. If that thing can destroy buildings as easily as you say, then I think it can help us win way more battles.
Dirk thought about it for a second, and then realized that he has 2 mini P.E.K.K.A.s, so why not just give up one? Besides, one destroyed his house, so he didn't really want to be around him anyways. So Dirk and the king made their trade. And then Dirk went back to his island, and the king became an unstoppable force with a new P.E.K.K.A., with a new mini P.E.K.K.A. Once Dirk got back to his island, he quickly rebuilt his house and started working on some new plans for his P.E.K.K.A. 2.0. Once again, he worked for weeks on end, but he still could not think of any solution to prevent the machine from making 2 mini P.E.K.K.A.s instead of one super P.E.K.K.A. He was about to lose hope, but then one day a broken ship washed ashore. Unfortunately, a wizard and Hog Rider had both turned to elixir, and what was left was the Hog Rider's hammer and the wizard's cloak. Dirk picked up the hammer and the cloak, and inside of the cloak was a bottle of blue liquid in it. The liquid was buzzing with electricity, and Dirk thought that this must have been the lightning spell. So he took it back to his lab, brought the mini P.E.K.K.A. in with him, and this time added the whole bottle of lightning to the mix. He turned the machine on and stepped out again. The machine started to shake and smoke again, before finally coming to a stop. This time the building exploded from the inside as a gigantic P.E.K.K.A. stepped out. This P.E.K.K.A. fused with the lightning spell and was just radiating energy, and when he stepped outside, Dirk's mouth hung open. and he quietly whispered to himself, "It's a Super P.E.K.K.A." With the new introduction of the Electro Dragon, the Clash of Clans Dragon family is pretty much complete, and in my way of welcoming the Electro Dragon to the world of Clash, I wanted to make a video combining the stories of the entire Dragon family. So here is the story of the Electro Dragon, the Baby Dragon, the Inferno Dragon, and of course, the good old regular dragon. Back on August 2nd, 2012, the flying beast known as the Dragon was released into the game of Clash of Clans, along with the other 9 original troops. In later years, the Dragon went on to have some other troop counterparts like the Inferno Dragon and the Baby Dragon. But in today's video, I'm going to tell you my Dragon's origin story. Back in the days when the Grand Warden had created and released the first 10 troops in the game, a dragon was amongst those troops. The dragon, however, took after the typical dragon stereotype where he flew off to a volcanic mountain and guarded some pile of treasure that he stole. It was just the way that the dragon was born, the same way that the goblins were born greedy, wizards were born arrogant, and barbarians were born stupid. There wasn't anything anyone could do about it. So for the first little while, the village got by without the dragon. Of course, it was a bit of a loss for the village since they were missing one of the most powerful troops in the game, however they were able to get by for the time being. And just like how the dragon had fled the village, so had a rogue group of goblins, who had all rebelled and formed their own little clan known as the Goblin Horde. That Goblin Horde had been making life very difficult for the village by stealing all of their resources and then storing it away in their little villages. They would then have to defend it from the village when they attacked them to steal it back. At first, it was easy for the village to beat the goblins, but over time the goblins' horde got smarter and built bigger and stronger defenses to stop them from being beat. It ended up getting to a point where the villagers could no longer beat the goblin bases, and since the villagers couldn't steal their loot back, the goblins were still able to keep most of their resources and start stealing more and more. Until it got to a point where the goblins took pretty much everything from the village, and being the greedy goblins that they were, what they stole wasn't enough. So they sought after new treasures greater than what they had. And coincidentally, that just so happened to be the dragon's treasure. So the goblins decided to take on the dragon's lair and try and steal his treasures. Despite being extremely greedy, the goblins were not stupid, so they were actually able to create an elaborate plan and steal all of the dragon's resources, without being noticed. And before the dragon even realized what had happened, it was too late. So now that the dragon had nothing left to defend, he returned back home to try and find out what happened to his treasure. When the dragon got there, the village suggested that it was probably the greedy goblins who had stolen his treasure, as that's what they've been doing to them the whole time. Then one of the villagers had an idea, and he suggested that they should both team up and help each other out to get both of their loot and treasures back. The dragon agreed, and together they were finally able to take down the goblin horde's bases, all the way up to their Goblin King's lair. And together, once they vanquished the Goblin King, they returned back to the village with all of their lost loot and treasures. They made a pretty good team together, so the villagers offered to help protect the dragon's treasure and he could help defend their loot. So the dragon thought about it and then agreed to it, since having 2 groups of people defend something is always better than just one. So the dragon was now a valuable part of the village, helping defend the village from attacks and even helping them steal some loot from other villages. However, part of being on a full-time guard shift for the loot, the dragon was never able to join the Clash Royale arena battles as he was already too occupied defending the treasures. However, his 2 dragon counterparts were able to take his place in the arena instead. And how the Inferno Dragon and Baby Dragon made it to the Clash world is an entirely different story for another time. Welcome back to part 2 of the dragon's origin story. This time taking a look at the dragon's 2 mini counterparts, the Baby Dragon and the Inferno Dragon. The Inferno Dragon, who carries a large barrel full of lava on his back, acts as a traveling single targeting inferno and is exclusive to Clash Royale only. The Baby Dragon, however, is in all 3 parts of the Clash universe, but for a reason to be explained later, he only rages when he's alone in the builder base and in our regular home base. However, when he's alone in the Royal Arena, he doesn't have the same rage effect. So why is that? Well, find out in the Baby Dragon and the Inferno Dragon's origin story. Not long after the village unlocked the dragon at Town Hall 8, with the help of the dragon, they made very quick progress and were ready to upgrade to Town Hall 9. The dragon was a huge help, leading most of their most important attacks, especially in wars, where the dragon was able to successfully bring home the 3-star most of the time. and by some very weird coincidence, once the Town Hall finished upgrading to Town Hall 9, the dragon laid 2 eggs. Everyone was shocked, including the dragon, who had no idea where those came from. But nonetheless, everyone knew what this meant. There were going to be some new baby dragons. And knowing that they were capable of growing to become as powerful as the regular dragon, they knew that they had to take extremely good care of them. So they took the eggs and laid them down next to the Town Hall, which was supposed to be the most secure building in the village. Unfortunately, the next day, a group of really greedy goblins stole the eggs in hopes that they would be able to sell it for a lot of gold or other resources. And when the dragon found out that his eggs had been stolen, he was infuriated and vowed to find whoever took them and that he would set them on fire. And when the goblins found out that the dragon had put them on his hit list, they started to freak out. They knew they had to get rid of the egg or else the dragon would burn them alive. But they also knew that they couldn't just return it, otherwise the whole village would know that they took it. So they ended up deciding to get rid of it instead. The goblins knew that if they hid it on the island, that the dragon would eventually find it and most likely trace it back to them. So they had to hide it somewhere much further away. So while the goblins were searching for a place to hide the eggs, they came across the master builder who was visiting the home village. He had just finished gearing up one of the archer towers and was about to head back. And right then the goblins knew what they had to do. So a few goblins went to quickly distract the master builder by doing some weirdly well-rehearsed dance, while the rest of the goblins went to go hide the 2 eggs in his tiny little rowboat. And to be completely honest, they did an absolutely awful job hiding the eggs, as they weren't covered by anything and they were sort of sticking out of the tiny boat. But luckily, the master builder was so tired and exhausted from working 70 hours straight that he didn't notice the 2 eggs, and instead, as soon as he got into the boat, he fell right asleep. And he didn't wake up until he arrived back at his night village. And when he did wake up, he finally noticed the 2 eggs in his towboat. The first thing he thought was, how the heck did these get here? And after that, he realized that they must have come from the home village and he should bring them back right away. But for some really weird reason, there was absolutely no way for the master builder to get back to the home village, unless there was a defense to be geared up. And since he just came back from gearing up the archer tower, there were no other defenses to be geared up for a long time. So for the time being, the master builder was stuck in the night village with his 2 eggs. And a few days later, both of the eggs hatched, where 2 tiny baby dragons popped out. Both of these dragons were able to fire these tiny little fireballs, but they didn't have any rage ability or anything. At least, not yet. Find out why the baby dragon rages in Clash of Clans regular base and in the builder base, but not in Clash Royale. And also find out how the baby dragon became the Inferno dragon in the next story. Once the village upgraded to Town Hall 9, by coincidence the dragon laid 2 eggs. While waiting for them to hatch, a group of goblins stole the eggs, but then had to get rid of them to avoid being killed by the dragon. They hid them in the master builder's towboat, and without knowing, he took them back to his night village. Then, a few days later, the eggs hatched and 2 baby dragons emerged, but they didn't have their rage effect yet. So find out in today's story how the baby dragon got his special ability, and how the Inferno dragon was created for the Clash Royale arena.
All the pain.
While the master builder was at the home village, the builder had shown him one of his new defenses that he was working on and planning on releasing for the next town hall, which was Town Hall 10. He had called it the Inferno Tower. And when the master builder saw this, he was actually really impressed. And rather than just being happy and proud of the builder, the master builder was determined to take his creation and make it even better. After all, he had to live up to his name of Master Builder. So when the baby dragons were born, the master builder had an idea that could make the Inferno Tower even better. Since in the builder's design and prototype, the Inferno Tower was just like any other defense, a stationary defense that could only target within a certain range. The master builder thought to himself, but what if I could transfer the Inferno Tower's powers to a living being, to make a troop that could be just as deadly as the Inferno Tower, but wasn't restricted to a certain distance or spot? So with this new idea, the master builder thought that a flying mini dragon would be a perfect fit. And to make the Super Inferno Tower troop, he only needed 1 baby dragon. So he brought both baby dragons to his lab, and at random he chose one of the baby dragons to turn into his new Super Inferno. And once he had the baby dragon, he took him to the only place that he knew he could get lava from, P.E.K.K.A.'s playhouse. So the baby dragon and the master builder headed over to the Clash Royale arenas and trekked their way all the way up the side of the volcano, Once they arrived at the top, the master builder filled a wooden barrel up with molten hot lava. And in case some of you guys are skeptical about how this wood is being able to contain all the heat from the lava, well, the barrel isn't just made from any type of wood. It's actually made out of the same wood used to make the master builder's battle machine. It's wood that was blessed with magic from the wizards to make it indestructible and immune to all sorts of heat. So that's also why that when the battle machine summons lightning, it doesn't set the battle machine on fire. It also holds the power of the electricity inside of the hammer. So if this works properly, the barrel should be able to hold the heat of the lava inside the barrel, so that it doesn't cool off and become molten rock. But anyways, back to the mountain. The master builder finished filling the barrel with the lava, and now the next step was to find a way to connect the barrel with the baby dragon's fire supply. So the master builder and the baby dragon traveled all the way back to the builder base, and then the master builder crafted a special helmet with a hose type device that would connect the helmet and the barrel. Then the baby dragon put the special helmet on, and the master builder fastened the barrel and hose to the baby dragon's back. The master builder then took a step back and watched as the baby dragon tested out his new armor. The baby dragon was now able to draw lava from the barrel, and then the lava would be released in the mouthpiece of the helmet, where the dragon would be able to fire a constant stream of lava out at his enemies. And the longer he stayed focused on an enemy, the more the lava would burn them. The master builder was incredibly proud of himself, and the baby dragon, or as he was now known, the Inferno Dragon, was pretty happy about his new powers as well. And not only were these two happy, the other baby dragon was just as happy to be able to see his baby brother again. And for a few days, everything was all good, where the two brother dragons were able to play around and destroy enemies for fun. But then, nothing ever lasts forever, so a few days later, the Inferno Dragon got really sick, to the point where he almost didn't have enough energy to fly anymore. The master builder quickly realized the problem. The Inferno Dragon's barrel of lava was running extremely low on lava, and it looked like the Inferno Dragon was becoming very reliant on the lava to stay alive, as it was now part of him. So the master builder immediately took him back to the Pekka's playhouse, and then the other baby dragon came around with them just to make sure his brother was okay. And when they finally got there, after the long journey, the master builder realized that he wasn't going to be able to make this incredibly long trip every few days just to refill the lava. So he figured he'd have to leave the Inferno Dragon at the Clash Royale arena so that he could stay close to the Pekka's playhouse at all times. And so he did. He left the Inferno Dragon there and he headed back to the builder base, and things went back to normal. As for the baby dragon, he couldn't decide where he wanted to go. Of course, he wanted to stay with his brother and go to the Clash Royale arena, but he also didn't want to leave the master builder since he was almost like a parent to him. And then he also really wanted to go meet his real parent, the dragon, back at the home village. And he couldn't really decide which one he wanted to do, but thanks to the clone spell, he didn't have to choose. He was able to go to all three places at once. But his connection with his brother was so strong that whenever he was alone in the builder base or a Clash village, he would burst out into a rage until another troop joined him in the air. And at the Clash Royale arena, he never had to rage, since he always knew that his brother would be somewhere close by. And that there is the full story of the dragon, the baby dragon, and then the Inferno Dragon. The newest troop in Clash of Clans, or rather should I say the newest beast inside of Clash of Clans, is a bigger, stronger, and more powerful version of the already popular dragon troop. The new Mega Dragon, known as the Electro Dragon, has some very unique abilities that have never before been seen inside of Clash of Clans. The Electro Dragon's attack bounces from building to building for some reason, but it does less and less damage per building it hits. He also has more health than the regular dragon and does considerably more damage, but perhaps the most unique part about the Electro Dragon is the fact that when he dies, he drops a lightning storm wherever he dies, similar to the dropping of a lightning spell. As my welcoming for the brand new troop at Town Hall 12, here is my story on how the Electro Dragon was brought into the world of Clash. Not too long ago, in a village not too far away, all the villagers and troops were all getting excited and ready to celebrate in anticipation for the revealing of the brand new upgraded town hall that the builder had been working on for the past 15 days. The entire village was getting in on the celebrations, and troops were just hopping from one dance party to the next. And these dance parties were being held literally everywhere, from inside the town hall, in a goblin hut, in the clan castle, and even in the middle of a battlefield. The parties were off the hook and every troop was having the time of their lives. And since the village had been maxed for a long time and were just waiting for something new to upgrade, the village was extra excited for some new things to do. But since they were maxed out, none of the troops or other builders had anything to do for those 15 days during the upgrade. So to kill time, they partied every day. Everyone was having a great time, while everyone, except for one troop, the dragon. Unfortunately, the dragon was just too big and couldn't fit inside of any of these parties inside the town hall or clan castles, and when he tried dancing outside with the Teslas, his wings kept flying all over the place and hitting things. so the dragon had to sit out the celebrations for all 15 days. During the time that everyone was partying and dancing, the dragon went to go raid some bases to help him kill some time. Even though the village was already full on resources, he still went ahead and started attacking bases. So during one of his raids, since it wasn't worth anything, the attack was sort of careless in a way. And normally when doing a zap, quake, drag attack, usually the lightning spells and earthquakes are deployed before the dragons. But since it was such a careless attack, this time the dragons were deployed first. And then once the chief realized that he forgot the lightning spells, he quickly dropped them on top of the air defense, and at this point in the raid, the dragons were already on top of their air defenses as well. And then they were in the process of taking them out. The first lightning spell hit the ground and a bunch of lightning bolts struck all around the dragons. Slightly startled by this, the dragon looked up to see all the lightning bolts smashing all around him. And as he was looking up, the second bottle of lightning spell was dropped from the sky. And awestruck at what the dragon was seeing, he opened his mouth in awe. And by some crazy chance, the bottle of lightning spell dropped right into the dragon's mouth. And when the bottle of lightning entered the dragon, the bottle didn't break completely. However, there was a slight crack in the bottle where tiny bits of lightning spell were seeping out of it. But overall, the lightning bolt stayed safe inside of the dragon and inside of the bottle. The dragon was a little bit shook up by this, but he tried to carry on in the battle. So he moved on to his next target and opened his mouth to spew some burning hot flames. However, when he blew out, instead of fire, a strong bolt of lightning came exploding out of his mouth. The dragon immediately shut his mouth and looked surprised as hell at what just happened. And all the other dragons noticed too. They all came over, despite still being in the middle of an attack, to check out what just happened. Then after being urged on by the rest of the army, the new electric dragon opened his mouth again and spat out a bolt of lightning. This time the bolt of lightning hit its target, but then bounced off that building and then hit the building right behind it. But it didn't stop there. It then bounced off that building and hit the one right beside it. And then it did the same thing to that building again. No one knew what was happening, but it would be later explained to them by the genius wizards that apparently all the buildings that the builder has ever constructed, they all contain a type of metal that is an excellent conductor of electricity. So when one building is hit with such a strong surge of electricity, if the building around it are close enough, they will absorb the shock as well. However, since the buildings already absorbed some of that initial electricity, the damage it does will be slightly less to the next few buildings. Anyways, after the dragons quickly took care of the rest of the base, they all returned home. And by the time they got to their village, they noticed that the dragon that ate the lightning spell bottle had changed appearances. His red skin or scales had turned into a bright blue color that radiated electricity. Furthermore, his jaw had changed slightly, where it changed into a more solid metallic-like material that could better conduct the electricity that came flying out of the dragon's mouth. It seemed that the leaking bottle of lightning spell was causing the dragon to mutate and change his appearance, and so when the dragons all finally got back to the village, the builder was just finishing up the town hall upgrade to Town Hall 12. And like always, once a new town hall is achieved, the entire village and troops all get hard to work farming up resources and upgrading buildings. So in the next battle, the Electro Dragon was brought into battle. However, this time unfortunately, he was taken out by an air defense and a seeking air mine. And when the dragon turned into Elixir, the lightning spell that was still in his stomach fell to the ground and broke, releasing the entirety of the lightning spell to wreak havoc where it landed. And that there pretty much covers all the Electro Dragon's unique abilities. So there is the story on how the dragon became the Electro Dragon. The Lava Hound is one of the tankiest troops in the game, for Clash of Clans and for Clash Royale. It can destroy bases and take down towers with ease. It can be an unstoppable force. So here is the story of how the Lava Hound came into the world of Clash. Back on September 16th, 2014, a bunch of the Clash of Clans characters had gone over to the Clash Royale arena to help test out the game, as it was still in beta. Once the troops got there, the king split them all into two teams. They then began to battle it out inside each arena. They started in the Goblin Stadium and worked their way up until they got to the P.E.K.K.A.'s Playhouse. P.E.K.K.A.'s Playhouse was a lot different than the other arenas, considering it was built on top of a live volcano. You could even see the lava running through the arena at the middle, and there was nothing but a small bridge to help cross it. Once the battle started, both kings sat back and were banking their elixir. Then the Red King started off by playing a max golem in the very back. The Blue King responded by playing a max level 13 Royal Giant in the opposite lane, following it up with some max Elite Barbarians, two of the most skilled cards in the game. The Red King ignored the Royal Giant and the Elite Barbarians and decided to go all out with his push, so he decided to play his minion horde right behind the golem. And as they crossed the bridge, the Blue King only had enough elixir to play a tornado. So he used it on top of the minion horde and the golem. The tornado pulled them back and off the edge of the arena. The golem and the minion horde got sucked into the volcano, and the minions tried to fly out, but the golem was falling right on top of them. Both kings were shocked, as the golem and the minions fell to their deaths. The king had only one option left to save them, but there was no way it would work. As the golem and minions were falling to their deaths, the Red King had one option left that could save them. But he just used all of his elixir on the Royal Giant and the Elite Barbarians. And he needed 3 elixir to play his tornado spell to maybe pull them back out. But unfortunately he only had 2 elixir left. The elixir bar was filling super slowly and it almost looked like it wasn't moving at all. The golem and minion horde were seconds away from hitting the molten hot lava in the volcano. And just as the king had enough elixir to play the tornado, the golem and minions hit the lava and lava splashed everywhere. Then the golem and the minions both started to sink into the lava. The Red King no longer needed the tornado spell, but then he looks over at his 3 other cards, and at the very end he sees a heal spell. So in a final attempt to save his troops, he plays his heal spell right where the golem and minions fell. At first, nothing happens, but then after a few seconds, some lava comes spurting up, and then from the abyss of the volcano, a new troop emerges. A glowing red-hot flying golem. The golem and the 6 minions must have merged together when the heal spell was played. As the new troops flew out, both the kings and the other troops stared at it in amazement. Then someone in the crowd of troops screamed out, "It's a lava hound." So now every time the lava hound dies in Clash Royale, it spits out the 6 minions that had fallen into the volcano with the golem. And that there is the story of how the lava hound was brought into the world of Clash. For almost 3 years, the Grand Warden had been absent from our villages, and not until December 10th, 2015 did he decide to finally make his return and come back to help our village. In today's video, I'm going to tell you my version of the Grand Warden's origin story. Way back in the days, before there was a barbarian king, before there were town halls, and even before there was literally anything else, the world was just a vast landscape of land and water. And one day, 2 immortal beings were sent into the world by the all-powerful gods known as the Lecropis. The 2 brothers were the very first troops ever in the village, and were blessed with incredible powers thanks to the Lecropis gods. The first brother's name was Jamine. He wore a red robe and held a book of all the most powerful spells in the universe. His brother, who was named Lexer, wore a blue cloak and held a very powerful staff capable of vaporizing just about anything. These 2 were pretty much the yin and yangs of the Clash universe, where one of them was the brains on the team and the other was the bronze and muscles. Together they were able to create an entire village and then using his spellbook to create other beings to coexist with them. Jamine decided to create 9 unique troops with the help of his spellbook. He created the Barbarian, the Archer, the Goblin, the Giant, the Wallbreaker, Balloon, Healer, Dragon, and the P.E.K.K.A, the very first few troops ever to enter into the village in Clash of Clans. The Wizard was also amongst all of the first troops in the game, but he was actually created in a different way, as explained in the origin story here. Then with the help of Lexer, he was able to control them and teach them how to fight for the village. The village was coming along very nicely and all was well inside of the Clash of Clans village. The army came back from attacks victorious most of the times, and their spoils of war were helping to create more and more buildings and upgrades. With all these extra resources, the 2 brothers also decided to create a troop dedicated to building and upgrading things in the village, just to help speed things up some more. So they created a single builder to do all of that. The builder was a fantastic at his job, and the 2 brothers couldn't believe that they didn't think of making a builder sooner. They ended up liking the builder so much that they wanted to make a second one as well. But once they created the second builder, he refused to work unless the brothers gave him 500 gems. And even though the brothers were incredibly powerful and had a spellbook with all known spells, there was no spell capable of duplicating gems, truly making gems the rarest resource in the village. So the brothers attempted to round up enough gems to pay the builder his extra fee. However, they could not come up with enough to pay him his 500 gems. So presented with the challenge, the brothers were determined to find a new way of duplicating gems using a brand new spell. So Jemine studied long and hard for a few days until he finally came up with a possible solution. So he grabbed one of the few gems that they had and he placed it on the ground. He then stood back and casted his spell. Unfortunately, the spell went right through the gem and split into 3 smaller bolts. Those bolts ended up hitting an army camp, a free spell, and a hidden Tesla. And then the spell ended up bringing those objects to life and turning them into 3 brand new troops. You can follow their entire story in this story right here. So Lexer took the 3 new wizards to go train them while Jemine went back to the drawing board. He figured out where he messed up and then he switched the spell accordingly. He then picked up the gem and tried again. He casted the spell once again and this time it actually worked. What once was just a single gem was now 2. He then casted the spell again and again and again until there were thousands of gems in front of him. The brother had finally found a way to cheat the system. After realizing the spell was a success, Jemine continued to create new spells to help them out even more. He created simple spells like a clone spell, and then he also created some spells that could increase his and Lexer's powers. He then later also found a way to combine his powers with Lexer's. Together they could become an even more unstoppable force, and rather than just winning most battles, they could win every single battle. So Jemine used the spell on themselves and they ended up merging together. Their cloaks combined, creating a purple cloak with a hood. He held both the staff and the spellbook. But they didn't just stop there. They created more spells to give them an aura that helps the surrounding troops around them by giving them extra health. And he even created a unique Eternal Tomb ability that could fully protect any troops within a close range around them for a certain amount of time. With all these gems and helpful spells, the village was excelling in every aspect and were making extremely quick progress. So quick, in fact, that the gods Lecropus noticed. They were watching all of this and realized that the 2 brothers could become a serious threat if they keep this stuff up. So they realized that they had to weaken them. But before they did anything, some other major event happened inside of the village. Something that forced the new Grand Warden to leave and possibly never come back. So come back next week to see the ending for the story in The Grand Warden Story Part 2. Before the Lecropus gods could do anything to nerf the Grand Warden, there was a problem within the village. Apparently the combined power between the Grand Warden and the 3 wizards were far too great and were causing mayhem in the village. Whenever they got too close, their combined power would cause a massive earthquake that would destroy absolutely everything. So the Grand Warden decided that he had to leave in order to save the village. So he then ended up leaving and using his powers elsewhere. He left the village and randomly traveled for a few days, going whichever way the wind would blow him. Then one day he finally came across some remote island. He decided this would be a good place for him to set up camp since it had pretty much everything he needed. He figured he would have to rebuild the whole village, but this time he thought to himself that he wasn't going to make the same mistake twice, and only create the builder after the village was done. So this time, trying to think ahead, he decided that the first thing he would do is create a builder. And after his experience creating the first few builders, he decided why not make this builder smarter and just overall better in every way. So when he casted the spell to create the builder, he put extra energy into it, trying to make the builder even better than the original ones. But what the Grand Warden did not realize was that when he left the village, he left behind part of himself. The main village was where he was able to draw most of his power from, and he didn't realize that. And now that he was a long ways away from home, he was not capable of casting any as powerful of spells. So his lack of power, mixed with trying to create an even better builder, ended up knocking him unconscious. Although, lucky enough, his spell ended up working and he was able to create a new, smarter builder. But the intense power from the Grand Warden spell ended up putting the builder into a coma before he could have woken up. So for a very, very long time, the new builder and the Grand Warden just laid on their estranged island. Then finally, after some time, the Grand Warden finally wakes up. Unfortunately, the Master Builder still remains in his coma, so the Grand Warden is left to tend to him until he wakes up. While the Grand Warden was waiting for the builder to wake up, he decided to create a town hall, where he left the builder to lay. He named the building after the town hall, but instead he called it the Builder's Hall, since that was the resting place of the new builder. But after years of waiting, the builder had still not woken up, and the Grand Warden was beginning to lose hope that he ever would. So after waiting for another month, he finally decided to give up. So he left the builder in his builder hall and then took off. And as the Grand Warden traveled around, he came across some troops who said they were heading towards the royal arena. So since the Grand Warden had nowhere else to go, he tagged along. And when he got to the arena, in the middle of the battlefield, he saw the Ice Wizard and Electro Wizard both attacking each other. And this was a great news for the Grand Warden. because that meant that if they were both at the Clash Royale arena, then that means that they weren't back at the Clash Village. So he immediately took off back to the Clash of Clans village. And he could not have gotten back at a better time, because as he arrived, the regular builder was in the middle of releasing his brand new defense that he called the Eagle Artillery. And this thing was going to be a beast and absolutely crush entire armies at a time. So the Grand Warden was needed desperately by the villagers to help protect their armies from it. So the Grand Warden was then accepted back into the village with open arms. However, the Lycanthropist gods were not as welcoming. They still were not very happy about him running away from the village like that. So as a small tiny punishment, they ended up cursing him so that anytime he wanted to help defend the village, he would be turned to stone and wouldn't be able to run anywhere this time. So with that, everyone was happy. The villagers had a way to fight off the new OP Eagle Artillery, the Lycanthropist gods got their revenge, and the Grand Warden was back at home close to his power source. Everyone was happy, but it's almost as if they were forgetting someone. Don't worry, the builder that was in the coma eventually ended up waking up in the summer of 2017 when a barbarian accidentally stumbled onto his island, as explained in the story right here. And let's just say that the Grand Warden created this builder with the expectations of being better than a regular builder, and let's just say that he didn't disappoint. These ranged units are some of the best troops in both Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. The three of them have their own unique abilities and powers, and the wizard trio are so similar, but at the same time they are quite different from each other. So what happened to cause these three brothers to take on such different abilities? Here is the story of the three wizards. Before there was a village chief, before there was a barb king or even an archer queen, and before most troops were even added into the game, there was an almighty being that had control over the Clash of Clans village. This so-called ruler of the village was a fair ruler and the rest of the villagers respected him. He was sort of a sorcerer that carried around a staff and a spellbook with him at all times. In battles, he was extremely selfless and tended to provide his army with an aura that kept them alive for longer. Overall, he was an irreplaceable asset and also a well-respected ruler. The Warden, as he liked to call himself, was about to test the strengths of his new powers by performing the most difficult spell ever attempted. He was trying to transform an object into a living person, something that only the strongest magical being could successfully do. He decided to try it on a gem, because that was the most valuable object in the village, and if he was successful, this new being could be almost as powerful as him, if done correctly. So the Warden places the gem on the ground and then stands back and casts the spell. A beam of light shoots out of his staff and travels straight towards the gem. Once the light hits the gem, it reflects through the gem just like a crystal, and from the gem emerges three smaller beams of light. The first beam of light hits the fire at the nearby army camp, the second beam hits a hidden Tesla, and the third travels straight towards the spell factory and hits a bottle of freeze spell. All three objects begin to smoke and transform into human-looking forms. Then, once the transformations finish, three mini wardens were standing in front of him. One wore a red cloak and for some reason had a giant afro. Another had a light blue jacket and snow white hair. The last wore a dark blue jacket and looked sort of crazy. The power from the beam of light must have been weakened when it split into three, then forging into whatever object it hit, resulting in three versions of the Warden. The Warden was glad that his spell worked, but he also didn't know what to do with these new troops. The Warden was also curious if his powers transferred over to his kids, so he asked them, "So, do you guys have any sorts of powers?" Then each of the mini wardens shot out a spell out of their fingertips. The red one shot a fireball, the blue one shot a deadly snowball, and the dark blue one shot straight electricity. The Grand Warden was actually really impressed, and was thinking that him and his three new wizards are going to destroy so many bases together when they attack. Just like one big happy family. They all came in for a big group hug, but once they touched, the ground started shaking, and then it got more and more violent. Spell bottles started breaking, troops started screaming, and buildings started crumbling. The wizards and Warden immediately backed up, and then everything stopped shaking. They looked around and they could see their entire village in ruins. Everything has been destroyed. The Warden conspires that their combined power is too great, and if all their power is in one spot, it can cause great damage to the people and things around them. So he suggests that they should all split up. He then says that he will volunteer to leave since his power was the strongest, and it wouldn't be fair to have 3 people leave when 1 person could just leave. So the Grand Warden packs his stuff and goes on his way. Together, the 3 wizards weren't powerful enough to cause any more earthquakes, but they still had the power to cast spells and the like. One day, the Red Wizard was walking through the village and he came across an old book. He opened it up and he then realized what it was. It was the Grand Warden's spellbook. He took it back to show the Ice Wizard and the Electro Wizard what he found, but before he could tell them, he found a note from the Ice Wizard sitting on the floor. It said, "I am sorry, but I need to leave. The weather is too warm here and I don't know how much more of it I can take. I am going to the Clash Royale arena where I heard that they have a new snow arena called Frozen Peak. P.S. Electro Wizard is tagging along with me. I don't know why, but he's sort of crazy and I don't want to ask. P.P.S. I'll come back to visit sometime around Christmas for about a week." So the wizard put down the note and continued reading the Grand Warden's book. And over time he learned lots of things from it. He was able to brew new spells for the village and potions to upgrade other troops' attacks and health. He also later became one of the favorite troops in the village, and then one day, 4 years later, the Grand Warden came back, when word had finally gotten to him that the Ice Wizard and Electro Wizard had left. Now he was here to stay for good, and especially because there was a new defense that had just been created by the builder, called the Eagle Artillery, and the village was going to need all the help they could get taking that down. Whatever happened to our beloved Hog Rider captain, and the mute wizard who never spoke after the first commercial, and the barbarian who trekked his way all the way across the bottom of the ocean just to find a new island? Here is the story of what happened to our brave sailors. Shortly after spotting land, the Hog Rider and his crew were minutes away from the shores of the new island. As they made their way to the island, a raging storm began to brew, creating waves the size of giants and hitting harder than a P.E.K.K.A. The waves came down hard and crashed the boat against the rocky shoreline. Sadly, there were no survivors. Our heroes were gone. Except for one fearsome warrior, the Barbarian. The Barbarian comes running out of the water to find his friends turned to elixir. Before exploring the island, he runs off back into the ocean, sprinting all the way back to the village. He tells them what happened. The whole village is shocked, but they were also very intrigued by this new island and wish to journey back to finish what the wizard and Hog Rider had started. However, they had no boat. Then, as if by some miracle, the remains of the broken boat had been swept back to their shores. The builders went and got a yellow bottle from a nearby building and dropped a heal spell atop the shipwreck and set sail for the new island. As the villagers were so eager to see the new island, they forgot the Barbarian. He began his second trip underwater all the way to the new island. However, when he got there, his friends had already left. The Barbarian is greeted by a master builder and offers to take him in. The Barbarian, furious at his friends for leaving him, he begins to get anger management problems, and to this day is told to fight with uncontrollable rage. And that is the story of why the Barbarian rages during every single battle, and also how the Hog Rider and Wizard died a tragic death. Lucky for us though, we've got plenty more of them back home. A long time ago, at the beginning of Clash of Clans, back when the game was just starting to make a mark on the community and started taking the world by storm, the developers and creators of the game were hard at work trying as hard as they could to make the game what it is today. Jeff, who was the lead developer at the time, had loads and loads of creative ideas, and had his own vision on the direction that he wanted to take the game. His ideas and personality poured into a certain character within the game. He was the Master Builder, but not the Master Builder that we all know and love today. Here's the story of what happened to the Master Builder. Due to unknown circumstances, Jeff was forced to leave. It could have been due to family reasons, or he could have left to help develop the hit games Clash Royale or even the newest game, Brawl Stars. No one really knows for sure. But one thing is for certain, Jeff was no longer with Clash of Clans. Soon after he left, the master builder within the game was left abandoned with nothing to do and without his chief. So he went into a long slumber. He continued his power nap until a Hog Rider and wizard stumbled upon his island, where soon after he was met by the chief of our village and his maidens. Having been asleep for nearly 5 years, he was anxious to start putting his creative ideas back to work. He quickly began building never-before-seen defenses like the Crusher, double cannons, and air bombs. He even put a spin on already popular defenses like the Archer Tower. Feeling in debt, he offered to improve our villages back home. So he took his little towboat back to our village and upgraded our cannon into a double cannon. After returning home, he realized how much work it was to travel all the way there and back. So he decided to never travel back again. For now. But that was only the beginning. He was only just getting started. He had so many ideas, but only so much time. It also didn't help that he was the only builder who could build all these extravagant buildings. He tried teaching the regular builders how to build the new buildings, but they just couldn't figure it out. Apparently, there is a special touch when it comes to whacking a building with a hammer. So only having one of him, his future ideas have to be put on hold. He has already drafted out the plans, but is waiting to release them for now. Some of the noteworthy defenses include the Mega Tesla, the Giant Cannon, and the Roaster. Not to mention all the new troops that are coming. But that's for another story some other time. Anyways, that is the story of how the Master Builder came to be. However, there are still so many unanswered questions within the game. Like, why is it always night in this village and always day in the other village? And what's the future of this new builder base? But that's all for another time. A few days ago, the most important yet underrated troop in the game vanished from our villages, and everyone has been wondering two major questions. So today, I am going to tell you the story that answers both of those questions. Why did the builder leave us, and where did the builder go? So without any warning, a few days ago, our beloved builders decided it was finally time to take a hard-earned vacation. He was very tired from working non-stop for 5 years, sometimes upgrading defenses back to back to back, and not getting the chance to sleep for up to 14 days. So without warning one day, he decided to pack up his stuff and leave. So he put his hammer in his bag and took off. He decided to take the fastest way to where he wanted to go, and that was by Springtrap. Although the Springtrap was the quickest way out, it was not the safest or most reliable. Where he initially intended to go to Heyday, where he could get away from all the fighting and destroying, but the Springtrap ended up flinging him all the way to the Clash Royale arena. Unfortunately, he ended up landing in the middle of an ongoing battle, where troops and builders were getting destroyed left and right. But thankfully, after only 3 minutes, the battle ended. The builder needed to get out of there right away, so he confronted the king. He asked him where he was and how he could get home. And to that the king replied, "You are in Clash Royale, in the arena Spell Valley, and everyone in this arena is required to fight." The king went on to tell him, "I will send you home after you have helped us get into the next arena, the Royal Arena." Obviously, the builder was not fond of the idea of fighting, so he decided to offer something else instead. He asked the king if he could help them get into the next arena, but not by fighting. The king was confused, but decided to allow it. So the builder got to work doing what he loved doing best, building things. In a matter of less than a day, he whipped up an entire arena, made from turning gears and lots of wood. He decided to call it the Builder's Workshop, which would be unlocked between Spell Valley and Royal Arena. The king, who was very pleased by this, since the builder kept his word, technically he did get them into the next arena. So the king told the builder he was free to take one of their balloons back to his village. But surprisingly, the builder refused. He said that he actually enjoyed it here and wanted to stay and build more stuff. So the king granted him his wish, and after seeing what he was capable of, decided to give him any necessary supplies he needed for his projects. But he also had one other condition, and that was that he had to do all of the maintenance on the arenas. So the builder spent his nights creating new inventions and his days maintaining the battlefield, which mostly consisted of mowing the lawn, lots and lots of cutting the grass. But the builder didn't mind too much, since no one was destroying any of his buildings. Sure, they were destroying the towers, but at least they weren't destroying his entire arena that he just built. So during his nights, he would work on his crazy new inventions, and one day he ended up creating a new troop for the game. It was the first of its kind, and it was the Sparky, the first machine troop within the game. Then he continued to create new troops. He ended up finishing the designs of 2 brand new troops that were the cannon cart and the flying machine. So he released the cannon cart, but right before he could release the flying machine, he received a letter from his village's chief, where the letter was apologizing and asking the builder to come back. So the builder thought about it and realized how much he missed all of the other troops back at the village. Plus he felt bad for everyone that the barbarian was ruining all of the buildings by whacking it with his sword. So he decided it was finally time for him to head back home. But before he left, he asked if anyone would like to journey back with him, and sure enough, a few of them actually said yes. So they took the balloon from the king and set off back home. When they arrived back home, they were greeted by everyone, and the builder was given a brand new statue of himself. As well, the barbarian, giant, witch, and wizard all offered to help him with building upgrades from now on. But everyone was truly curious about who his new friends were. So the builder introduced them. Meet the bowler, baby dragon, miner, ice wizard, and the battle ram. Unfortunately though, the ice wizard and battle ram can only stay for about a week, then they have to head back home. Everyone welcomed the new additions with open arms, and everything was great, and the builder felt a lot better. So he decided that he wanted to give them another present as well. So he got out his designs of the cannon cart and gave it to the chief. But as if out of nowhere, a gust of wind ended up taking the draft right out of his hands and carried it off the island. As if by fate, the gust of wind carried the designs all the way to the night village, where the master builder found the designs. A little upset, the builder said, "That's alright, I've got plenty more better ideas." He then showed them the designs, and their jaws hung open. Everyone couldn't believe it, but they couldn't wait for him to add it into the village. So after a long and eventful day, everyone decided to call it a night, and for the first time in a long while, the builder truly felt at home. Hey guys, so this week marks the second week that our builder had left us, and since then the barbarian has taken over as the temporary builder. But now his week is up and it's time for the giant to take over. So here's my quick story on why the barbarian got fired from being builder, and why the giant is taking over. I hope you enjoy, and please note that this is not created by and or endorsed by Supercell. It is simply a fan-made story to explain these events. A week ago, our builder left. The barbarian picked up the builder's hat and hammer and thought to himself that he was destined to be the next builder. Sadly though, he did not live up to his dreams, because after a week on the job, he was fired. Everyone appreciated all of his work and efforts in trying to help, but they didn't like his technique and how he built things. It looked really unorthodox, and people were scared that he was going to hurt someone with his sword, especially our heroes. While the barbarian was upgrading them, he nearly whacked them with the sword on multiple occasions. Now that the heroes are done being upgraded, they decided to fire the barbarian and take away his builder hat. Although the village did still need a builder, so they had to think who would make the best builder. They needed someone that was strong enough and capable of building these big buildings. So after interviewing each troop, they decided to hire the giants as the next builder. He was big and strong, plus he didn't need a hammer, since he could punch as hard as a hammer. Plus he had a lot of spare time since most players don't use him too much in battles. But the real convincing point was that the giant also promised to defend the village when they are on defense. He said if anyone destroys my tiny little shack, Giant will smash them. And since the barbarian was now fired, his friends from Clash Royale went back to the arena. Of course the barbarian was upset by this, but the royals did write him a very formal letter relieving him of his position. Well, it's that time of the week again. The time of the week where our king and queen have to make some cuts to the Clash of Clans workforce, and sadly for the giant, he just wasn't cutting it. The king and queen had a week-long discussion about the giant's performance as a builder, and they decided that he wasn't cut out to be a builder. For a few reasons actually. For one, that he was meant to destroy things, not build them. Plus, because of his size, when he was traveling around the base, he came really close to squashing a few villagers. And also, for some reason, he kept insisting on upgrading the walls. For whatever reason, he really enjoyed hitting walls. Not to mention, one of the reasons he even got hired in the first place was because he offered to help defend the village when it was attacked. But he was practically useless on defense. A few archers had no problem taking him out. So it's really no surprise that the giant is being fired. He's way more useful destroying things, not building them. So now it's time for the heroes to make another big decision on who to hire next. They needed someone that was smaller than the giant so that they don't squash anyone, and smarter than the giant so they don't keep doing walls. And someone who can add more value on defense. You know who would be perfect for this? That's right.
You're the wizard.
The wizard. But sadly he was too busy this week working on some new boom in a box spell. Maybe next week he can take over. But until then, I guess the witch will have to take over. At least she offered a pretty cool spell that shrinks troops when being attacked. And she might even have her Larrys to help her build stuff quicker. But they might not be allowed since they are just kids and underage workers are against the Clash of Clans law. Who knows, the giant may even find a job somewhere else. With his brand new resume, he could probably find a job anywhere. The newest character added to the game in Clash of Clans is known as the Trader. However, what is his real identity, and why did he come to our village with all of these super cheap deals for these magical potions? Find out in the Trader's backstory. Let's go over to the Clash Royale arena, and take a look at an underrated troop who's always lived in his brother's shadow, the Dark Prince. It's no surprise that between him and his brother, the regular prince, he isn't the favorite prince by a long shot. The Dark Prince was always jealous that the prince did more damage than him, he was better looking, and he was even worth more elixir. This would obviously upset anyone, having to always live in someone else's shadow. Even their father, who was one of the kings of the arena, preferred the prince over the Dark Prince. In each deck, he would often choose to use the regular prince instead of him, so the Dark Prince held a bit of a grudge against his dad and his brother. He always wanted to get back at them, but there was literally nothing he could do. If ever he fought his brother, he would lose, and he would never take down his dad on his own. Especially with the help of his princesses, he could never do it. So he heard about the discovery of magic potions in the Clash of Clans village one day, and he was thrilled, because the village would be sending them to the arena at some point, and he could use them to make himself even stronger. His prediction was right. The Clash of Clans village sent over a whole carriage full of potions, but the Dark Prince anticipated this and met them before they could reach the arena. He told them that he was one of the king's sons, and that he could take the potions to the arena for them. The barbarian, who obviously wasn't the brightest, agreed to this and gave the Dark Prince the wagon. The Dark Prince's plan was working out perfectly. Now all he had to do was find the power potion, drink it, take all the extras, and bring the rest of the potions to the arena. This way, even if the king decides to share the potions equally with everyone, the Dark Prince will still have had more potions than everyone else, therefore making him stronger. The Dark Prince grabbed what he thought was the power potion, but since he didn't know any better, he accidentally grabbed the resource potion instead. So he chugged the entire bottle, and he immediately felt off and knew something was wrong. By accidentally drinking a potion that wasn't meant to be drank, it ended up changing the Dark Prince's appearance. His eyebrows grew much larger and turned blue, and then he also grew a blue mustache and a goatee. The potion also ended up giving him a bit of a crazy look in his eyes. The Dark Prince no longer looked like a prince, and surely his dad and brother would never let him hear the end of that, so he had to make sure that they never saw him like this. and he also never wanted anyone else to be able to have the real power potion and get what he could never have. So he decided to steal the rest of the potions on the carriage, and he took it back to the village. He followed the barbarian's trail back to his own village, and he went to go see the only person that could turn him back to what he once was. He met with the Grand Warden, and he asked him what he could do to reverse the spell. But unfortunately, the Grand Warden told him that the only way to do that would be with a spell that would require gems. And now that the Grand Warden's magic wasn't as powerful as it once was, it would require a lot more gems. And by a lot more, I mean a lot more. So the Grand Warden sent him on his ways, thinking that he would never be able to acquire enough gems. But the Dark Prince had an idea that could get him what he needs. So he took his carriage of potions and traveled from village to village selling his potions in exchange for gems. It seemed to work really well. Some villages wouldn't buy any, but then others would buy him out because they were a super cheap deal, and it sort of acted like a black market. And every time he would run out of potions or supplies to sell, he would intercept the barbarian who transports the new supply of potions from the village to the Clash Royale arena, and then he would steal them from the barbarian every time. So the potions would never actually end up making it to the arena, and they never even knew that they existed. And then the Dark Prince would have a never-ending supply of potions and supplies. And at the end of each day, he would go to see the Grand Warden to see if he had enough gems. And each day, the Grand Warden would send him off telling him that it still wasn't enough, and that he would need a lot more. So it looks like the traitor, as he was now known, was going to be sticking around for a lot longer. And despite this Dark Prince being missing from the arena, no one seemed to notice since he had thousands of clones running around in the battle instead. A long overdue story video. The Master Builder is just like any other builder, except better in every way. He has some crazy inventions that make for some of the most powerful defensive structures in all of Clash, as well as some sort of different laboratory that turns regular troops into even more powerful versions of themselves. The Master Builder was recently discovered 2 years ago on an abandoned island by a Hog Rider who set sail on his ship, and until now the Master Builder was only able to upgrade a single defense on the regular base, and was rarely ever able to visit our home base. So in today's story, I'm going to explain why all of this is, and how the Master Builder was brought into the world of Clash. A long time ago, before the beginning of Clash of Clans, there were 6 dwarf brothers who were all born a few seconds apart from each other. Their names, in the order of youngest to oldest, were Bashful, Sleepy, Grumpy, Happy, Sneezy, Bee, and Bob. The 6 dwarves were born to be builders of the new Clash of Clans village. And since they were the only ones who could build stuff around the village, they were able to charge absurdly high prices in exchange for upgrades and buildings. For example, they would charge over 1 million gold just for a town hall upgrade, or close to 1 million elixir just for an army camp upgrade, where all he would do is put a carrot on top of a campfire. But unfortunately, the builders were the only ones who were capable of doing this at the time, so all the builders were fairly greedy and always charged the highest price possible that they could get away with, which was always a large majority of what the village had. But the villagers didn't hate the builders for this, they were just grateful that the builders were doing their job, regardless of the cost. Now the oldest of the brothers, who was Bob, was always a bit different from his brothers. As the oldest, he was a lot smarter than the rest of his brothers and took advantage of the rest of the builders. The older builder, Bob, always wanted to create a bunch of new defenses and buildings, but his other 5 brothers always voted against him, and since it was always a 5-to-1 vote, he couldn't do anything about it. It always seemed like the other 5 builders gained up against him, and since Bob the builder wasn't able to create any of his own creations, and instead he had to build the predetermined defenses and buildings that the other 5 builders had agreed upon, he decided that he would just do something else. He decided that he would make sure that the required buildings were built or upgraded, but he himself would not be the ones doing it. He decided that he was going to build himself a little bot or a small assistant to do all of the building for him. So the Master Builder stayed up all night one night and built himself a fully functioning builder bot that would be able to do all of the hard work for him. And he was going to tell all the other villagers about it too. And then once he was done building his builder bot, he immediately put him to work to test it out. It worked just as he had intended. But then in the morning, before all of the villagers and troops were awake, the other 5 builders got up to get ready for their day of work, but then they did notice Bob's the builder's new builder bot. They immediately confronted Bob about this and they asked him what he was going to do with it. And Bob told them and was very straightforward about it and said that since he couldn't build his own special buildings and such, that he was just going to put them all out of business with his new builder bot, and he was going to give the village full access to his new builder bot. They told him that he couldn't use his builder bot because if the rest of the villagers found out about it, then they could use the builder bots to replace them, or even put them out of business. And Bob agreed, and he said, exactly what I want. They would no longer be able to charge such high prices for upgrades, and they might not even be able to compete with the bots since they would probably do it for free since they were robots. And they could work forever without sleeping or taking breaks. So they told Bob that he had to get rid of it, but Bob refused. He was already pretty mad that he couldn't use any of his cool, unique creations, so there was no way in heck that they were going to let him take away his little builder bot. He even aggressively told them that they could go screw themselves, and that they're all going to lose their jobs because of this. And since the builders weren't exactly the fighting types of troops, they couldn't physically take it away from the master builder, at least while he was there. And even if they could take it away while he wasn't there, he would just be able to make a new one since there was pretty much unlimited resources around them on the Clash of Clans base. So the 5 other builders had to think of something different, and they had to think of it quick, before the rest of the troops woke up. They had to get rid of the builder bot and Bob the builder before all the other troops woke up and found out about it. So they went over to the wizard's tower and woke him up from his sleep. While the wizard was still waking up and getting over the shock of 5 dwarves standing over his bed, they asked him if he could make them a sleeping potion. They then each offered part of their savings, which was a lot since they were charging such high prices for their upgrades, that they had fortunes and fortunes to offer the wizard. In total, they offered the wizard so much gold that he couldn't say no. He then whipped up a sleeping potion and then gave it to the builders in exchange for the gold. He didn't ask any other questions about what they were going to use it for since he was just focused on the gold. The builders then took it, and then after he gave the builders the sleeping potion, he quickly took a swig of it himself and then went right back to bed. The 5 builders then went back to the Bob the builder and told him that he looked thirsty, and offered him something to drink. Bob innocently said yes please, and then he was unknowingly handed the sleeping potion. Instead of taking a quick sip though, he chugged the whole bottle. Turned out he was dying of thirst and hadn't had anything to drink all night. So right after chugging the whole bottle, he immediately passed out. The 5 builders then dragged him over to the water, and together they all quickly built a boat. In no time they finished the boat since they were all working on it together, and then they loaded the builder onto the boat. They then went back to go grab the builder bot who was just sitting there. They loaded the builder bot onto the boat with the builder, and then Happy volunteered to take them away. So Happy boarded the boat and then set off for sail. He took them to an island decently far away and then unloaded them. He then reprogrammed the builder bot to build a few key structures for Bob when he woke up. So Happy programmed the builder bot and then took the boat back to the home base. And once he got back, he hid the boat in some cave and then went back to the village. When he got back, all the other troops were still asleep. Happy then went and found the other builders and told them what had happened. He dropped them off, had the builder bot build some necessary buildings for Bob and the builder bot when he woke up, and that Bob should be waking up anytime soon. And then the rest of the builders went back to work as if everything was normal. They even gifted the boat to the village chief just to be on his good side. And for the longest time, no one ever seemed to notice that a builder was missing. In fact, everyone got so used to the fact that there was only 5 builders that it was as if there was never even a 6th builder. So life went on per usual for many years at the home village. Meanwhile, over at the other island, Bob the builder never seemed to wake up, considering he drank an entire bottle of the sleeping potion. Usually that would be enough to knock out an entire army for a day. But Bob ended up laying there, while his little builder bot built a builder hall, a clock tower, a laboratory, all in anticipation for when the builder finally woke up. But Bob just kept sleeping. Days went by at first, and then weeks, and eventually years went by. But by this point, the builder's bot's battery ended up dying and ended up falling over right next to Bob the builder. Then finally, a few years later, in the summer of 2016, the sleeping potion finally wore off and Bob woke up. And when he woke up, he noticed that there was some sort of builder hall there, and a research lab, and some giant clock building for some reason. But they were all completely destroyed for some reason. It turned out that while he had been sleeping for so long, that all the buildings that the builder bot had completed eroded and had been torn down. And then Bob looked down beside him, and he saw that his little builder bot had completely passed out. He quickly assumed that his battery must have died, and judging by the length of his beard, he assumed that he had been sleeping for a long time. So since Bob had no idea where he was or any idea how he got there, he decided that he may as well start making himself as comfortable as possible. So he got to work repairing his builder hall and repairing all the other broken buildings around his base. And then lucky for Bob, a few days after he woke up, he saw a boat crash on the shores of his island. And from the rubble, he saw a Hog Rider and his hog. And that there was the beginning of the builder base, where Bob was able to start creating whatever sort of creative defenses he could think of, and where he had access to other unique troops like the Rage Barbarian, the Sneaky Archer, whose stories you can check out. I'll have them linked in the description or by clicking the eye in the top right of the corner. But Bob actually ended up liking it so much at his new island that even though the Hog Rider was able to show him the way back home, Bob didn't want to leave. In fact, in his new village, he was the boss. He referred to himself as the best builder and even called himself the master builder. He even later created himself a sick battle machine so that he could even join in on some of the fights, so not only would he be a builder, but he would also be a fighting troop. And that there is the story on how the Master Builder was introduced into the world of Clash. In the Make sure to watch part 1 of this story before watching this video. I'll have it linked down below, or you can click the top right of the screen right now. Recently in Clash of Clans, the Master Builder has gained a new automated friend who looks like he's going to do all of the Master Builder's tasks for him. And with all this newfound free time, the Master Builder is planning on visiting the regular base plenty more. But now instead of taking his rowboat, he's going to ride a Barbarian all the way between the two bases on his underwater taxi service. So why did the Master Builder wait until now to build himself an automated builder friend? And why did the Master Builder wait until now to join the other builders in the home village? Find out all of that inside of today's story, the Otto's origin story. So for nearly 2 years, the Master Builder enjoyed his time on his small island. He got to create many powerful defenses like the Crusher, the Roaster, the Mega Tesla, and many more. He even got to encounter many super powerful new troops like the Boxer Giant, the Super P.E.K.K.A, and even other troops like the Hog Rider. He didn't have anyone telling him what he could and couldn't build here. It was pretty great. Although being stuck on his own little island did take its toll on the Master Builder. He was getting really tired of always being around the same troops all the time. He was getting especially mad that the Barbarian was always angry and constantly destroying things for no apparent reason, and the sneaky archer who was always being super creepy by lurking in the shadows and creeping up on him, and the fact that the Super P.E.K.K.A was constantly leaking radioactivity from its armor, and that there was a risk that any moment it could blow up him and the rest of the base at any given moment. So the Master Builder really needed a break. So one day he decided to craft a tiny little rowboat out of some spare materials that he had gotten from a shipwreck that had happened a long time ago. Long after the shipwreck, there was still debris that was washing up on shore, which was too bad because the Hog Rider could have really used all those materials a long time ago to get back to his home village. But nonetheless, everything worked out for the Hog Rider, and the Master Builder was able to craft himself another little rowboat. Unfortunately though, the raft was only big enough to support one person. And so the Master Builder set sail to go visit the home base, by using a map that the Hog Rider had drew from his memory. It was a long journey back to the home village, but he eventually made it. The Master Builder went and met his fellow builders, and when the other builders saw him, they expected him to be super mad, but instead the Master Builder decided to forgive them. He told them that he actually liked his life on his own little island a lot since he could make whatever he wanted with no one in charge of him. But he did say that he was getting lonely over there, and wished he could come back here and work with his fellow builders every now and then. The other builders obviously didn't want him back and messing up their buildings because that was literally why they kicked him out of their base in the first place. But since they saw that he was feeling apologetic and humbled, they decided to give him a chance. But the builder first had to get permission from the Barbarian King and Queen since they pretty much ran the village. The builders were expecting to have to answer a lot of questions about who this new builder was and why there was 6 of them now, but instead, when they met the King and Queen, the builders asked if it was alright that their friend, the Master Builder, helped out around the village a little bit. And the King and Queen didn't even look at the builders, and they just simply said, yeah, sure, whatever, I don't care. So the builders looked at each other and were wondering what the heck just happened. But since they got a yes, they decided to just leave before they started asking any more questions or changing their minds. So the builders went to go tell Bob the good news, and Bob was ecstatic and couldn't wait to show the builders some of his new creations. But to burst his bubble, the other builders weren't as excited. They told him that they didn't want him changing or adding a bunch of new defenses because they worked really hard on all of the ones they already have. The Master Builder's energy quickly dialed down slightly after hearing that. And then the Master Builder then looked around and saw countless numbers of defenses. He counted 7 or 8 cannons and then like 8 or 9 archer towers and 4 mortars, 4 wizard towers. There was a ton of defenses. He then said to the builders that there were so many of each defense, would it really matter that much if he just upgraded one of those defenses? And then he promised, I won't do anything different to them, I swear, I'll just upgrade it just like you guys would. The builders got into a small huddle and quickly had a debate. And then they went back over to the Master Builder and then they told him, fine, you can upgrade 1 cannon, and they will decide based off of that. The Master Builder smiled and said, great, and then he walked over to the closest cannon and immediately got to work. He worked on it for days, and when he finally finished, the other builders came over to take a quick look. It took them a millisecond to realize that the cannon he had upgraded was not a regular cannon. Somehow the Master Builder literally combined 2 cannons into 1, and made some sort of double cannon. So the builders went over to the Master Builder who was sitting there, exhausted from upgrading the cannon for a few days straight. The builders looked at him and asked, what the heck was that? The Master Builder looked up, acting all confused, and then replied with, what do you mean? So the builders clarified by telling him, "You promised that you would upgrade it just like we would." The master builder, who was still confused, looked behind him to see that the cannon he had just upgraded was in fact no regular cannon. He looked it up and down from the ground up and said out loud, "Ah crap, not again." And then he explained to the builders that he was just so used to upgrading his cannons as double cannons that he must have accidentally turned the cannon into a double cannon. He apologized a ton and then said that it would never happen again. But the builders weren't having it. They said that he wasn't going to get a second chance, and then they sent him back on his rowboat and he went back to his builder base. The master builder was really sad that he had got kicked out not only once, but twice. So he sailed back to his builder base and went back to work as he usually did. He kept telling himself that he didn't even really want to go back to the home base, and that he was happier here by himself. But that wasn't really the case. So the master builder went back to his everyday life for a while and kept pretending. But then, a month or two later, the master builder started to get annoyed by the rage barbarian when he kept smashing his buildings whenever he had a little temper tantrum, and then when the boxer giants would practice on his own defenses. The master builder had had enough once again, and needed a break, so he set sail back to the home village. And when he got there, he begged and pleaded for a second chance. The builders were all hesitant about it, but they thought that the master builder seemed genuine about his apology, and that he would listen this time around. So they decided to give him a second chance. But this time, just to make sure that they didn't have a repeat of last time, they let him upgrade an archer tower instead, because they figured there's no way he could mess up a simple archer tower, right? So for the next few days, he worked on the archer tower, and when he was finished, the other builders came over to look at it. And when they saw it, they were shockingly pleased to see that the master builder actually listened to them. And when they went to go say thank you to the master builder for listening, they saw that the archer tower just shrunk. It looked like the archer tower sunk into the ground and was about half the height of a regular tower. The builders then looked over at the master builder and looked at him in disgust, and then told him to leave. So once again, the master builder was sent back to his builder base. Then a few months later, the master builder was getting bored and annoyed on his builder base. So once again, he set sail for the home base. And once again, he gave them a long apology and then begged and pleaded, and once again the builders gave in. But this time they told him, "We don't trust you with our cannons or archer towers, so you can have one last try on our least favorite defense that we rarely ever use, the mortar." So once again, the master builder got to work and started upgrading the mortar. And a few days later, he finished the mortar and the builders came over to check on it. This time it wasn't as subtle. There was straight up 3 mortars all jammed into one, and the builders all looked over at each other and then told the master builder that this was the last straw and he was never allowed back at the home village ever again. So again, the master builder sailed back to his builder base. Then a few months later, once he got bored again, he sailed over to the home base, but this time when he got there, the builders all immediately told him to screw off, and that he was out of free chances, he was never allowed back, and then they told him that if he ever came back, the wizard was instructed to burn his little rowboat. So this time, the master builder went back to his builder base. He was extremely sad and upset since this likely meant that he would be trapped on this island forever. So for a long time, he stayed on his little builder island, with no chance of ever going back. Until one day, he received a note from a barbarian. The note wrote that they were getting super swamped back at the main village and they really needed the extra hands. They wished they could get the other troops to help out, but it turned out that the witch, the giant, the barbarian, and the hog were all incompetent at building things, so they really needed Bob's help. The note continued to say that they would need this help for an extended period of time since there was just a brand new update that came out with a lot of new stuff to upgrade. So they suggested that he got someone to take over his base while he was gone. So the builder quickly looked around his village seeing who would take his spot, but after a quick look, it became evident to him that none of the troops were going to be capable of replacing him. So instead, he resorted to building his own builder assistant. So he decided to go back to his builder hall and pick up his old friend, the builder bot that had originally got him sent off his base. He had never rebuilt it since he never had the materials to do so. So he quickly had to find some materials. But unfortunately, he had just upgraded his builder hall to builder hall 9 and he was completely out of materials. So he had nothing to upgrade his builder bot with. But then he looked over at his rowboat and realized that he used all of his extra materials from the shipwreck to build that rowboat. And then he figured that he had no use for that rowboat anymore, so he could just destroy it, since any time that the wizard would see that rowboat, he was instructed to destroy it. So he used the wood from the old rowboat to make the bot. He then grabbed a wheel from a broken cannon cart and attached that as its legs. Next, he attached some of his old tools to be used as the bot's hands, and then he used the Hog Rider's telescope, which was from the shipwreck from a long time ago, and he used that to be the builder bot's eye. And last but not least, he grabbed an antenna that he placed on top of its head that he could use to communicate with it. So after he finished putting it all together, he had to test it out. But then he realized that he didn't know what to call his bot. So he decided to be super unimaginative about it and name it the Official Time-Saving Titanium Occupant, or for short, Otto. So he then asked Otto to build him something, and then the Autobot quickly zoomed off to build something, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years and years. Which in fact he had, since he was just laying around in the Master Builder's Builder Hall for a few years. The Master Builder wasn't the only one impressed by all of the Builderbot's work. All of the troops came over to watch their new little Builderbot work his magic. And while all the troops were watching, the Master Builder hopped onto the Barbarian's back and they made their way back to the home village. And that takes us to where we are now, where the Master Builder will be able to permanently stay in the home village as long as he would like. But only time will tell if he has learned his lesson about gearing up defenses, and if he will abide by the other builders' rules. And that there is the Master Builder's story, and the origin of how the Autobot was brought into the world of Clash. The Hog Rider is taken to the skies. Now not only can he hop over walls, but he can fly over them too. After nearly 2 years of waiting to see the Hog Rider on the Builder's base, we are finally getting to see the Hog Rider in action. So 2 years after the world watched the Hog Rider discover the Master Builder and the Builder base for the very first time, what took the Hog Rider so long to join the Master Builder's army? And how did pigs learn to fly? Find out all of that inside of today's story on how the Hog Rider became the Hog Glider. If you guys want to win one of 2 $25 gift cards, make sure to subscribe to my second channel called Variance Music and like this video. Winner will be drawn at the end of June, so make sure you do enter. And anyways, let's go ahead and get back into the video.
Land ho!
Nearly 2 years ago, the Hog Rider had for the very first time ever discovered the Master Builder on an abandoned island all by himself. How the Master Builder got there, we don't know. But I will be posting a story explaining the Master Builder's origin story very soon, along with his brand new builder bot named Otto, and how these two were brought into the world of Clash. So make sure you subscribe and check back for those stories, because they are going to explain a lot of unanswered questions inside of Clash of Clans. Anyway, after the Hog Rider initially discovered the builder base, he had to quickly sail back to the Clash of Clans village to let everybody know about his new discovery. All the other troops went crazy and couldn't believe the news, and the village chief and heroes praised the Hog Rider for his discovery. The Hog Rider was treated like some kind of war hero, and he really liked it. He smiled to himself and then said quickly, "Come, and I'll show you." Unfortunately though, the chief and heroes couldn't go because they simply had to stay in the village in case it was attacked while they were gone. And some other troops were about to go and raid a base, so they couldn't come as well. So that meant that only the builders, villagers, a giant, minion, balloon, baby dragon, and P.E.K.K.A could go with the hog. So they all began boarding onto the Hog Rider ship, well, all of the troops except for the Barbarian. It looked as if somehow he missed the boat's ramp and instead accidentally ran into the ocean. The Hog Rider looked at the part of the ocean that he ran into and was waiting for him to pop back up, but for some reason he never did. So the Hog Rider just shrugged to himself and said, "Oh well," and then he undocked the boat and set sail. It was another long journey on the water, but eventually they made it back to the builder's base. They all unloaded off the boat and then met the Master Builder and began exploring the place. And just as they were finishing up, the Barbarian came running out of the water, and turns out he ran all the way there and somehow ended up finding his way to the builder base. The troops didn't think too much of it and just shrugged it off. The troops visited the woods in the builder base and explored some other parts of the village as well, and they were in awe. Unfortunately though, their trip had to be cut short because they had already been gone from the village for long enough, and the other troops would probably start to get worried, and they also need to be used in the village to build stuff and raid. So the Hog Rider began gathering all the troops back at the boat and got ready to set sail back home. It was a slightly tighter fit on the boat this time since the Barbarian was tired and didn't want to run all the way back this time. So the troops all squeezed onto the boat and then undocked and set sail. Unexpectedly though, the boat began to quickly sink. The boat started to gain on water and boards on the boat started to fall out. It turned out that the ship was at its maximum capacity on the way to the builder's base, and once they added that one extra Barbarian, it pushed past the maximum capacity and caused the ship to break. So as the ship continued to take on water and fall apart, the troops jumped overboard and were forced off. The boat did not make it very far off the coast of the builder's base, so the troops were able to walk back to the shore as shown in the loading screen here. The troops all finally got back to the shore where they wheeled themselves onto dry land. They all stood there soaking wet as parts of the boat began washing ashore. There were planks of wood, fabric used to make the sails, and even the Hog Rider's telescope. The troops all sat there shocked and scared as they now had no way of getting back home. The Hog Rider, who was the captain of the ship, decided to take charge. He asked the Master Builder if he would be able to rebuild a boat for them, but the Master Builder told the Hog that he didn't have any materials to spare, and unfortunately the only extra materials he had were the ones that just washed ashore from the shipwreck. The Master Builder said that he might be able to make something out of the materials from the shipwreck, but it would take him a while, since designing new buildings or inventions usually took a while to craft. In the meantime though, the Master Builder told the Hog that he is welcome to take his little rowboat back to the village, but unfortunately it only fits 2 troops, so just enough room for the Hog and his Hog Rider. He warned the Hog that it would take him a lot longer to get back to the village though, since it was a much tinier boat. So the Hog Rider and his Hog hopped into the little boat and they set sail back to the main village, while all the other troops stayed in the village. While the Hog Rider and his Hog were out at sea, the Master Builder made the other troops feel at home. And as days started to pass by, the troops got a bit bored, and so the Master Builder tried his best to make things a little interesting for them. And long story short, they became the Boxer Giant, the Beta Minion, the Super P.E.K.K.A, and etc. All of these troop origin stories can be explained in future videos. And if you guys have one in particular that you guys want to see, then make sure you leave a comment down below suggesting a troop, and I will try and do that one as soon as possible. Anyway, the Hog Rider was out at sea for nearly a week before he finally made it back to the home village. And when he finally got to the village, he either needed to find a boat or bring some resources back to the builder base so that the Master Builder could rebuild them a boat himself. So firstly, the Hog Rider went to go ask the village chief and the builders if they had another boat or if the builders could build them a new one. Unfortunately though, the chief didn't have any other boats because the one that got destroyed was his only one. And the builders said that they'd love to build a new boat, but they wouldn't be able to because they were stuck doing upgrades for the next 14 days straight. So the Hog Rider had to think of another option. And then he remembered a time a few years ago when 2 barbarians stole a balloon and flew off to some faraway island. So the Hog Rider thought that he would be able to go ahead and give that a go. But instead of stealing the balloon, that he would simply ask the skeletons for it. So he asked the skeletons, but they ended up saying no. So the Hog Rider knocked them away and then stole the balloon anyways. He figured that he would just be able to take a few trips back and forth to bring all the troops back home. The Hog Rider sailed across the ocean, but this time in the air. He got back to the Builder Island in almost no time, but as soon as he got there, the Hog Rider realized that he had no idea on how to land this thing. So the balloon began sinking faster and faster until it hit the ground with a big thud. The Hog Rider and his Hog walked out to the rubble and looked back to see the balloon completely destroyed and on fire. And as they stood there and watched it burn as there was nothing they could do. The Hog Rider and the Hog then turned around to see that all the other troops were looking at them. The Hog Rider looked at them and said, I guess we aren't going back to the home village anytime soon. But all the troops seemed to be okay with that, because they actually really liked it here on the builder's base and they didn't mind staying for a while. The Hog Rider felt awful though, and he needed to find a way back to the home village, but this time he didn't have the Master Builder's rowboat, so he had to think of something else. The Master Builder and the Hog Rider had to think a bit outside of the box to get back, and they ended up thinking that maybe they didn't need a boat, and maybe the Hog Rider could fly back instead. So together they went back to the pile of the shipwreck that washed back to shore, and the Master Builder said, so this is what we have to work with. So together they got to work, and in the end they ended up using the wood to create some sort of structure, and then they used these sails to create a wing, and together it formed some sort of hang glider. That was the best that they could do. The Hog Rider went to go quickly test it out, and he got up into the air and it was working, and he started sailing. He ended up sailing so far he found himself hovering over some other base. A defense ended up locking onto him and hit him with one shot. The Hog Rider ended up falling out of the sky and landing on some defense below him. The defense was stunned for a few seconds as it was processing what the heck just happened. Then to avoid dying while the defense was stunned, the Hog Rider mounted his Hog, and as he usually does, and started swinging. He quickly wiped out the cannon and the archer tower, and ended up destroying the whole base. Turns out he only landed on top of a Builder Hall 3, so it wasn't too bad. When the Hog Rider finally found his way back to his base, he was pumping with excitement. He had never single-handedly taken out a base like that before. All the other troops gathered around him and cheered, and the Hog Rider had never felt so happy before. In fact, he liked it here so much more than back home, that he decided he might just stay on this base like the rest of the troops. Plus, he really liked this new act of flying, and he didn't want to tell the skeleton the bad news about his balloon. And so he did, and to this day, he fights alongside the Master Builder on the Builder's base as he swoops into villages and flies over their walls with his hang gliders before dropping down on unexpected defenses to wipe them out. And that there is the story on how the Hog Rider became the Hog Glider. And in case you missed the original Barbarian King story, you can check that out by searching up the Barbarian King story. It's one of the first ones that pops up. I really recommend that you do, as it is one of the most popular and well-received stories that I have created. But anyways, into the story. For the longest time, the Barbarian King has been one of the most powerful troops in all of Clash of Clans. He's been around the village for the longest time as well, and with that, he has become one of the most popular troops in the entire village. Alongside the Archer Queen and then the Grand Warden, together they can single-handedly take out almost half of a base. Amongst those three, the Barbarian King is the tanky troop, but even as a tank, he still dishes out a considerable amount of damage. He helped the village achieve many great milestones, all the way from helping the village loot enough resources to reach new town hall levels, all the way to coming in clutch in clan wars and trophy pushing attacks. He's really done it all. And while doing all of this, he has always been in search of his long-lost best friend, Barbar, who he had lost in a tragic balloon accident a long time ago. The king would send out random search parties looking far and wide, but they would never be able to find his friend Barbar. But recently, 2 summers ago, he had finally found his friend. Of all places, he found Barbar on an island inhabited by someone known as the Master Builder. Apparently, this was considered the builder base, and this is now where Barbar lived. At first, the Barbarian King didn't recognize Barbar since he hadn't seen him in such a long time, and plus he had changed a lot since he last saw him. But finally, he had recognized him, and after a really long time, they were reunited, and the Barbarian King had felt as if he had accomplished everything he had ever set out to do. Well, at least he thought he had. Because one day, a strange man came riding into the Clash of Clans village on his pony. The man on the horse claimed to be a king. He also claimed to be from a brand new place that he and the other kings like to call Clash Royale. The king came to the Clash of Clans village, and he basically started giving all the troops offers that they couldn't resist, and then he handpicked them and took them to the Clash Royale arena. He even offered the Barbarian King a spot in the Clash Royale arena, and the Barbarian King was sort of honored because he had never really met a real king before. He wasn't really a king himself, since he was just the king of the barbarians, whereas this other king that had offered him a spot was a legitimate king with gold and other riches, a throne, a castle, and all of that. So all of the troops made their way to the Clash Royale arena, and it was sort of a long journey, but they finally made it. The king and all the other troops were so far very happy since they were all being paid generously, and the king was treating them very well. The new king gave all of the troops a full tour of the arena and showed them all around. Then once all of the tours and stuff had finished, the king showed the troops over to the training arena, where troops were given a chance to try out some friendly battles. All the troops performed really well, and the king seemed very pleased with all of them. But then when it came to be the Barbarian King's turn in the arena, he didn't do as well as expected. For starters, in his first battle he went up against the P.E.K.K.A, and he got absolutely destroyed. They both costed the same amount of elixir, but the battle wasn't even close. Then when they went up against each other again and again, the Barbarian King just kept losing over and over again. But that's okay. Sometimes troops that cost the same amount of elixir aren't always equal, and some of the same price troops beat the other all the time due to different strengths and weaknesses that they have and different advantages that they bring on the battlefield. But since the king wanted to help out the Barbarian King, since he was one of the royalties from the Clash of Clans village, he had created him a bunch of special brand new armor that he was told would boost his health, but in reality all it really did was give him a confidence boost. The new armor looked pretty sweet, where it almost made the Barbarian King look like a gladiator. But even with the new armor, there was still another big problem. The part that really sucked for the Barbarian was that after every battle he had to take an hour-long nap, every single time. This was a massive problem that the Clash Royale King had, and he really couldn't fix it, because he couldn't be having after every single battle, having to wait a whole hour just so that he could battle someone else again, whereas all the other troops were immediately ready to go just like that. So unfortunately, there was no need for the Barbarian King anymore at the Clash Royale arenas because of his napping issue. The Barbarian King was kind of upset by this, and the Clash Royale King saw this, and so he told the Barbarian King that he could keep the super sick new battle armor that he had created him. And he even said that he would create the Barbarian King some cool new armors in the future. This seemed to make the Barbarian King feel a bit better about himself, so he wished the rest of the troops good luck and thanked the king, and then made his way back home. When he got back to the Clash of Clans village, everyone stared and admired at his brand new armor. The Archer Queen came up to him and said that he looked exactly like a gladiator, and the Barbarian King kind of liked the sounds of that, and so he decided to formally change his name to the Gladiator King. And that there is the story on how the Barbarian King became the Gladiator King. 2 months ago, the Barbarian King got a serious aesthetic upgrade by being converted from the Barbarian King into the Gladiator King. If you missed the video explaining how that happened, you can check it out by clicking the I in the top right of the screen right now. But now, after realizing that the armor didn't make him as powerful as he was expecting to be, the Barbarian King is determined to find a new set of armor that will truly make him one of the most powerful heroes in the Clash of Clans village. The Barbarian King's journey will be explained in today's story of how the Barbarian King became the P.E.K.K.A King. And before we get into today's video, I wanted to let you guys know that I will be hosting a very small giveaway for everyone who subscribes to my second channel called Variance Music. I will be giving away 2 prizes of $25, and I will pay it out through PayPal if you have it, or I will purchase an iTunes or Google Play gift card of your choice. And to enter, all you have to do is click the first link in the description below and subscribe to Variance Music, and you'll already be automatically entered. And you can also get bonus entries just by commenting on the Variance Music videos or on any of these videos on World of Clash. I'll be doing the draw on April 30th and announcing it shortly after that, so make sure you check back then. And anyways, let's go ahead and get into today's video. So a few months ago, the Barbarian King was extremely excited and proud of his new set of armor that he had just gotten from the Clash Royale King. But when he got back to the Clash of Clans village, he quickly found out that the armor didn't make him any stronger than he was before. The king believed that this was because he had simply received some sort of faulty armor from the Clash Royale King. So the king went back to the Clash Royale arena to ask the Clash Royale King for a new set of armor. But unfortunately, the king of the Clash Royale arena said that that was the last set of armor that he had, and they didn't make those anymore. So the king was forced to come back to the Clash of Clans village empty-handed, unfortunately. The king was pretty upset now that he had gone through all this work of getting the armor for absolutely nothing. But he still did believe that whatever armor he was wearing had the possibility of making him stronger. So one day he was sitting around pondering what was the strongest type of armor that he could get access to and get a hold of. Then when he was sitting there, he saw an army approaching his base. It was an all-out raid with golems, wizards, and P.E.K.K.A.s, an OG go-wipe attack. The king was forced to stand his ground and defend his base as he always does, but when the army approached him, he ended up getting faced in a one-on-one situation against the P.E.K.K.A. In the fight, the Barbarian King took the first swing, slashing his sword against the P.E.K.K.A.'s armor. The sword weakly bounced off of the armor as if it hadn't even affected the P.E.K.K.A. Then the P.E.K.K.A. came back with a full-out swing and knocked the king out good. The army then went on to wipe out the rest of the base, and 1 hour later, after the Barbarian King was finished recovering, he popped up and had a great idea. He wanted to get his hands on the same armor of the P.E.K.K.A.s. But then he thought a little bit more about it. He literally just got his butt kicked, so there was literally no way that he could take the armor through force. Instead, he was going to have to go to the creator of the P.E.K.K.A., or the source of the P.E.K.K.A., to get another set of armor specially made for him. And the king knew that there was only one person capable of making such a high quality and sturdy set of armor in the Clash of Clans village: the builder. So the Barbarian King went to go find the builder. It shouldn't be too hard to find the builder since he was most likely just somewhere in the village working on an upgrade. But when the Barbarian King did finally find the builder, he was too busy to talk. He had been working tirelessly on upgrades for the past week and was too exhausted to talk at all. So the Barbarian King was forced to wait until he was finished doing some of those upgrades. But then when the builder did finally finish doing his upgrades a few weeks later and had some free time, he left to go to the Clash Royale arenas to unwind. Apparently, whenever the builder was lucky enough to get some free time, he liked to spend it relaxing and watching battles in the arena. So this meant that the Barbarian King was forced to go track down the builder over at the Clash Royale arenas. So the king packed up his sword and his helmet and then started his journey over to the arenas. Once he got to the arena, he began looking for the builder. Finding the builder was a whole lot easier than he had expected, since the builder was one of the most rowdy fans in the whole arena. The king went over to the builder, but had to wait until the battle was finished, since the builder was way too into the battle. And once the battle did finally finish, the builder sat down and stopped screaming at the top of his lungs. The king decided to keep it short and simple since the next battle would be starting very soon. The king asked the builder if he would be able to create a new set of armor for him that were made of some sort of special material, the same as the P.E.K.K.A.s. The king asked the builder if he would be able to create a new set of armor for him that were made of the same materials as the P.E.K.K.A.s. The builder responded to the king, telling him that since he didn't have a lot of free time, he would do it for the Barbarian King under a few conditions. One, that he could get a special statue of him made in the Clash of Clans village. Since the builder couldn't just build the special statue, it had to be bought using only gems. And two, that he could get a few of those special potions that put the builder into overdrive. And last but not least, the builder said that he was tired of constantly having his builder hut destroyed. He was done with having to constantly rebuild it and have it destroyed and rebuild it over and over again. So he wanted his builder hut moved inside of the walls of the base and to be heavily protected so that there was less of a chance of having it destroyed. The king thought about it for a few seconds, knowing that a lot of his requests were going to be hard to justify to the Archer Queen, since he would have to get access to their stash of gems in order to pay for these potions and statues without being noticed. But finally, the Barbarian King determined that it would be worth it and that he really needed this P.E.K.K.A.'s armor. So the Barbarian King told the builder that he had himself a deal. So once the Barbarian King got back to the village, he snuck into the town hall and went down into their vault and grabbed as many gems as he could carry. He then took those gems and bought himself the statue of the builder and placed it at the top of the base. 1 down, 2 to go. Next up, he took the gems to the trader and bought himself 5 of those special blue builder potions. And lastly, he had to figure out a way to get the builder's hut inside of the base without making anyone else mad or suspicious. So the Barbarian King had to take a bit of a blow by switching his spot inside the base with the builder hut. It was a huge shot to his ego, but eventually he thought that it would all be worth it. So once he finalized the switch, he went and met the builder. The builder was very pleased with the Barbarian King's efforts, and the builder said that he would get started straight away on the P.E.K.K.A.'s armor. But first, the builder had to find the original designs for the P.E.K.K.A.'s armor since he hadn't used it in forever. It took him a while, but eventually he found it hidden deep inside of the laboratory. And once he found the designs, he used one of those new builder potions that he just received and finished the armor in no time. He then went to go meet the Barbarian King, where he handed him his new set of brand new P.E.K.K.A.'s armor. The king tried on the new P.E.K.K.A.'s armor and it fit perfectly. The Barbarian King looked at himself inside of a mirror and almost jumped in fright when he saw himself. The new armor made him look 10 times more threatening, and he was very pleased with his new armor. He looked like a cooler version of the P.E.K.K.A.'s, and he was already embracing the new look. So much, in fact, that he insisted that all the other troops started calling him the P.E.K.K.A. King. And that there is the story on how the Barbarian King became the P.E.K.K.A. King. The Barbarian King has already gone through many changes, whether it be by leveling up and becoming stronger than ever before, or whether it be something more major like becoming a champion gladiator fighter, or becoming the king of the P.E.K.K.A.'s. But despite all those major changes, he has not yet been through a change as major as the most recent one, where the immortal Barbarian King died and became the Skeleton King. So stay tuned for today's story that will go over the Skeleton King's origin story. But 4 years? 5 years? How long has it been since the Barbarian King has been roaming around the Clash of Clans village? Doing the same old job of attacking and defending villages. The Barbarian King definitely has a good reason to be feeling bored, as he does nearly the same thing every single day. And it's for that reason that the Barbarian King absolutely loves special events and holidays, because during those events, new things happen and the Barbarian King and all the other troops get to experience a load of new things and get to have a bit of a different experience than their normal everyday lives. And so very recently, the Barbarian King was feeling even more bored than usual. He was pretty much just counting down the days until the next fun event, which just so happened to be Halloween. But Halloween was almost a whole month away, and the Barbarian King was a little distraught from that. But then the other day, the Barbarian King overheard a rumor of a brand new Halloween-themed arena in Clash Royale. It was the very first piece of new event news that the Barbarian King had overheard, and he was extremely intrigued. He tried to find out more about the new Halloween-themed arena, and he found out that apparently a new secret limited edition arena was going to be getting released soon in Clash Royale. The Barbarian King was so excited, and the fact that the arena wasn't actually released yet made it even more exciting for him, because it was a bit of a mystery and a surprise. So the Barbarian King thought that it would be a fun way to kill time to go and look for the new hidden Halloween arena and be the very first person to ever find it. Nothing much was happening in the Clash of Clans village right now anyways, so he left to go search for the Halloween arena. The Barbarian King traveled to the Clash Royale lands, and once he passed over the border he had to be much more careful, since now that he was no longer in the Clash of Clans lands, that meant that if ever he died, he wouldn't be able to respawn like he usually does, and he would be dead fully. So that meant that he was no longer immortal and had to be very careful. The Barb King searched for a long time before coming across a murky and dark looking swamp. It looked super spooky, and the Barbarian King thought that he was on the right track. He then poked his head through a clearing in the trees, and his eyes widened as he found himself staring at the brand new Halloween themed arena in Clash Royale. He was going to be the very first troop to ever set foot on it, and so he began walking over to the field area to go do it. But just as he was about to take his very first step on the new Halloween arena, he heard a loud roaring or growling sound. He looked to the right of him and saw a massive glowing purple golem staring directly at him with his piercing eyes. The purple golem looked extremely angry and was ready to attack as if the Barbarian King was trespassing on his property. The Barbarian King assumed that the new purple golem must be guarding the new arena, but despite the piercing eyes of the purple golem and the massive size of it, it didn't scare the Barbarian King. The Barbarian King was itching for a new and exciting fight, especially against a new troop like this that he had never fought before. And so the Barbarian King drew his sword and charged the purple golem. The Barb King took a quick slice and chopped off the golem's arm, and then quickly went in for the finishing blow. The golem exploded, and then the Barbarian King turned around to walk away. But little did he know that the purple golem didn't die, it just split into two smaller golems. So as the king was walking over to check out the rest of the new Halloween arena, the purple golemites ran up behind the barbarian king and smacked him on the back of his head. The king then passed out and fell straight into the green river flowing between the arenas. The king then began floating downstream. Later, as the royal ghost was heading back to his castle after a long day of battles, he came across the barbarian king laying at the side of a riverbank. The royal ghost went over to the king and noticed that the king wasn't breathing. The king was dead. The royal ghost luckily knew a thing or two about being dead, and so with the help of some of his ghostly powers, a small bit of a skeleton spell, and a haste spell to speed up the process, the royal ghost was able to resurrect the barbarian king. Unfortunately though, the royal ghost was no necromancer or witch, and probably should have went and gotten the witch or the wizards to help him. And so when he did resurrect the barbarian king, he didn't fully bring him back. The barbarian king was still his same old self, except for the fact that he just looked a bit different. And by a bit different, I mean very different. The barbarian king was literally a walking skeleton now. Although he was still just as strong and just as smart as he was before, he just lacked muscles and a skin to show for it. Which was a little creepy, but the barbarian king thought it looked awesome, and it also saved him time of having to go buy a Halloween costume this year. So anyway, once the barbarian king regained consciousness, the new skeleton king tried to get up, but he quickly stumbled. The royal ghost quickly explained to the skeleton king that it may take some time getting used to before he can be back to his normal strength. And so the royal ghost offered to take the skeleton king home and help him adjust, since he had gone through the same thing on his own. So together, the royal ghost and the new skeleton king made their way back to the Clash of Clans village with perfect timing for the spooky month of October. The royal ghost also ended up staying to help out the skeleton king adjust even more and stayed for a little bit inside of the Clash of Clans village throughout the month of October. And that there is the story of how the barbarian king died and became the skeleton king. Hey guys, before this video starts, I wanted to let you guys know that we are coming very close to 500,000 subscribers. It's a crazy high milestone, and I wanted to ask you guys that if you guys aren't already subscribed, to go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and even consider turning on post notifications. It's completely free to do, and it helps me out a ton on my road to 500,000. I also checked my analytics, and turns out over 80% of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if you are watching this video and enjoy, then make sure to subscribe, because I do post tons of other videos that are just like this one, so I'm sure you'll find the other stuff enjoyable as well. Anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's video. The Grand Warden is the newest and most recent hero added into the Clash of Clans village. Being the only support hero, he has become a staple in every single Town Hall 11 and Town Hall 12 army, with his Ring of Immunity. And for many years, he has been the exact same strong, powerful, and wise Grand Warden that he always was. But at the beginning of this month, the Grand Warden underwent a serious change, and more importantly, a serious new makeover, where he transformed from the good old wise Grand Warden into the new Party Warden who carries a massive boombox everywhere he goes on top of his shoulders. So in today's story, I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys my version of how the Grand Warden became the reckless Party Warden. So for nearly 4 years, the Grand Warden has been roaming around our villages, sharing his wealth of wisdom to all of the new troops. He has been around for a very long time, and during that very long time, the Grand Warden hasn't changed a whole lot. In fact, the only changing he has done in the last 4 years is from his regular self into the stone statue he becomes on defense. But other than that, he has remained the exact same over the years. And one day, some of the troops noticed this as well, where they would see the Grand Warden go through the exact same routine every single day, where he would wake up, attack, defend, and then go back to bed. He would never go around socializing with the other troops or go to the village bar after attacks, or even take part in the village debates and politics, despite being looked up to by all of the troops. So one day, a group of troops came over to see the Grand Warden. They had to knock on a stone statue to get his attention first though. So the barbarian went ahead, knocked on the statue, and then the statue poofed into the Grand Warden. Even after seeing it happen so many times before, the troops still got a little startled and took a quick step back. But then they gathered their wits, or lack thereof in the case of the barbarian, and asked the Grand Warden if he wanted to come watch some Clash Royale battles with them, since he wasn't really doing anything anyways. At first, the Grand Warden thanked them for the invite, but then refused. But to that, the archer insisted that the Grand Warden come. Her invite came off a little more hostile than she was hoping for, but it seemed to get the job done, so it worked out anyways. So without really having too much of a choice, the Grand Warden accompanied the rest of the troops to the Clash Royale arenas. And once he got there, the troops found their way to their seats, and the Grand Warden followed them. They all sat down, and the Grand Warden started to watch his very first Clash Royale battle ever. He found it intriguing, but it wasn't quite something he would go to see on his own anytime soon. But since he was dragged there, he sat through all of the battles and tried to enjoy it. Once the battles were all done, the archer said that they were going to have some sort of fair down on the ground level, so the troops and them all took off to go take part in that. And as the Grand Warden was getting up from his seat to join them, he saw that one of the kings was coming over to him. The king greeted the Grand Warden and told him that he was heard a lot about him, and it was a pleasure to have him at the Clash Royale arenas. The king then asked the Grand Warden if he'd like to come with him to his little castle. The Grand Warden didn't really have anything better to do, and so he accepted the invite and followed the king to his tower. Once they got to the king's tower, they went to his family room, and the king sat down in his big chair and turned the TV on. The TV was just playing on in the background as the king started up a conversation, and the two chatted for a while. The conversation wasn't too important, but about an hour later, the king looked at his clock and said, "Oh shoot, I have more battles starting soon, I've got to go. But please do feel free to stay and make yourself at home." And so the Grand Warden decided to sit down and try watching some of this crazy TV thing that the king was watching. The Grand Warden had never seen TV before, but he was extremely intrigued by what was happening on the screen. It looked like it was some sort of musical with a bunch of people singing. The Grand Warden really liked what he was hearing, and so he stayed for a bit longer and just listened to the songs and watched the performances. And in fact, he even went and sat in the king's chair. The music he was listening to was so different from the ones that he was used to hearing, and they were so much better, especially comparing it to the Hog Rider singing. God, that was awful. But alas, it was time for him to go back to the Clash of Clans village, and once he got back, he couldn't stop thinking about the music he had heard. And so he wanted to go to find some of that music in person. So he went to none other than the builder to ask him how exactly he got to the real world. The builder then told the Grand Warden exactly how, through using the spring trap and the baby dragon to get back. And then so, the Grand Warden listened to all of his instructions and then took off to the real world following all of those steps. The Grand Warden was on a mission to find more of that music. He ended up finding some sort of music shop on some street, where he found a gold chain, a microphone, sunglasses, a new outfit, and most importantly, a boombox, all inside the same shop. And since he wasn't from there, he had no idea that he had to pay, and so he left the store without paying. But obviously the cashier ended up calling the cops on him, and the cops came rushing in. But when the cops did try and get him, the Grand Warden just walked right by them. And so when the cops threatened to shoot the Grand Warden, and the Grand Warden didn't listen, they began firing away. But that didn't faze the Grand Warden, as he just popped his Eternal Tomb ability and just walked right by them without even being touched. He then ended up finding his way back to the Clash of Clans village with all of his new stuff. He didn't even need the help of a baby dragon since he was able to fly. And now that he had this new boombox, he was constantly playing all of his new favorite songs everywhere he went. No matter where he went, he was playing music, and even when attacking. But the troops didn't seem to mind. In fact, it actually seemed to help them, as when they were in the circle of the music radius, they actually seemed to gain more health. So it worked out the best for everyone. And that there is the story of how the Grand Warden became the now hip and cool party warden. One of everyone's favorite troops in Clash of Clans and Clash Royale is a powerful and humorous character who just so happens to also be able to incinerate troops with his fireballs. So although he is a fan favorite with his magic tricks, he's also someone that his enemies fear deeply. So this formidable troop is truly a legend in the Clash world. But the big question right now is, who the heck is this new wizard who has an obsession with partying all the time? Find out in my story on the Party Wizard's origin story. Also, for the winners of the July giveaway have finally been drawn, and the winners are as shown here. I have responded to the original comments with further instructions on how to claim the prize, and if you didn't win last month, you can enter my August giveaway for $100 simply by liking, subscribing, and answering my daily question in the comments below. Best of luck to everyone, and now on with the story. So, a long time ago, the wizard had multiple brothers, many of whom went on to do amazing things, such as the Ice Wizard who learned to control ice and snow, and the Electro Wizard who learned to harness the power of electricity. and himself of course who could summon massive fireballs. But the one brother that no one ever talks about is his brother named Chad. No one has ever heard of Chad until now, but for good reason. And that's because he's never been around and has an unhealthy obsession with partying. As the youngest wizard in the family, he felt that he could never live up to his family's expectations of him, especially when his older brothers were out there controlling fire, ice, and electricity. And so because of this, he decided to at least enjoy himself all the time by partying. His parents even tried to help him become more powerful like his brothers by helping teach him powerful spells. At one point, they even wrote down on a piece of paper one of the most powerful fireball spells ever. But Chad just crumpled up the paper and shoved it into his pocket like he didn't care. He ended up falling so much in love with dancing and listening to music, so much that in fact he wanted to move away to a place that had parties way more often than the Clash of Clans village. And so just like the builder did a while back, Chad decided to leave the Clash of Clans village and go to join the real world, where there was always a party happening somewhere. He ended up staying in the real world for a really long time, and he had no intentions at all of coming back to the Clash of Clans village. Well, at least not until he found out that Clash of Clans was actually throwing their own huge party for their 6-year anniversary. When he heard that big news, he thought to himself that this could be one of the parties of the year, and there was no way that he could miss it. And so the party wizard began making his way back to the Clash of Clans village. But Chad had been away from the village for so long that he forgot exactly how to get back home. And so for a long time he wandered around until finally many days later he got lucky and found the Clash of Clans village by chance. But when he finally did get back, it was too late. The 6-year anniversary party was over and he had missed the biggest party of the year. Chad was pretty upset by this and was getting ready to go back to the real world to make up for all the partying he missed, but before he could leave, his brother the wizard ran up behind him and yelled stop. Chad turned to look at him and then the wizard said to Chad, "You look exhausted, you've been gone for so long. Just come stay one night with me and then you can leave in the morning." So Chad decided to take him up on it. He stayed the night with the wizard inside of his wizard tower. But when the wizard finally woke up, he woke up to screaming and yelling and the sounds of cannonballs flying through the air. Apparently the village was being attacked. The wizard poked his head out of the small door and saw that there were barbarians running everywhere, giants smashing buildings, and Hog Riders singing terribly.
Now you got me.
The wizard just sat back and watched from the tower as all the fighting went down. He then watched his brother and the other wizard tower shoot at all the attacking troops and watched them take out all of the enemies. Then when the battle was finally done, Chad watched as the rest of the village cheered and congratulated the wizards on their work. The wizards were basically like heroes here. And when they were finally done celebrating, Chad went over to his brother and asked him to teach him how to defend the village just like he did. He wanted to be a hero and be celebrated just as much as them. His brother looked at him and told him that if he was going to do that, then he would need him to give up his partying for good. And Chad agreed to do that. He thought it was finally time to do something more productive and helpful, and so he locked his party outfit away in a closet and locked it away. And then after that, his brother began showing him the ropes of running his own wizard tower. And Chad did an amazing job. It was almost like he was born to do this. He was just as good as the rest of the wizard towers and was doing extremely well, and for the whole time he didn't even think about partying once. But then, a little less than a year later, the village announced that they were going to be celebrating their 7-year anniversary with a huge party. And at first, Chad tried to resist the urge of going back to this party. But he was only holding on by a thread, because this was a similar party to the exact party that he missed a year ago. So he really wanted to go to this one, but alas, he refused to go. But since he was only holding on by a thread, once his magic rabbit opened up his locked cabinet with his party outfit, he just lost it and went back to his old ways. He went full out party mode at the 7-year anniversary, but at least on the bright side, he still did care about the village. So he wanted to keep defending it even though he still liked partying. But the village chief wouldn't let him. He said that with his partying habit, he couldn't trust him to repeatedly show up for his job. For example, what if he was too busy partying one night and didn't wake up in time the next day while the village was being attacked? So Chad was unable to defend the village anymore, but there was nothing stopping him from attacking. So he joined the Clash army, and while he was waiting to attack by the army camp, he reached into his pocket and found some scrunched up piece of paper. He looked at it and noticed that it was some super powerful spell that his parents had written down for him a long time ago. And so the next battle, he ended up testing that spell out, and it did way more damage than his regular fireball. With this new fireball, he found a special niche inside of the army and found that he was even more powerful than the wizard himself, although he did have less health only because his outfit didn't provide as much protection as the other wizards. And so for the next month, the party wizard stayed in the Clash of Clans village and partied hard while also helping them attack on offense. But alas, only time will see if this will be the last that we see of the party wizard. And that there is the story of the party wizard's backstory. Stay tuned for some live attacks if you guys want to stick around for that. The story of the Yeti begins a long time ago, back at the beginning of Clash. Back then, as many of you already know, there were 10 original troops that you could use inside of the barracks. But what you may not know was that there was actually an 11th troop back then, but that just wasn't available in the barracks. This other troop was a big, strong, hairy creature that had horns, and was basically like a giant. The one problem with it though was that he was way too nice to be in battles. Rather than to attack the enemies, he would simply try to befriend everyone instead of trying to destroy them. Obviously, this proved to be an issue for the king because he needed stone-cold killers and beasts in his army, not jolly good fellows that are friends with everyone. And since the troop was of no use to the king, he had no choice but to banish the troop from the village. And for a long time, everyone in the village, including the chief, had forgotten about this troop. So once this new troop was banished from the Clash of Clans village, where did he go? Wherever the wind blew him. He started to travel up north in search of some new friends. He wandered for a long time, but never found anyone. He kept wandering to a point where it started to get really, really cold, and snow started to fall from the sky. He decided to keep going a bit further, but if he didn't find anyone, he would just head back, because he couldn't really stand the cold for too long. But as he continued walking, he heard some mini screams coming from the distance. He quickly ran over to see where the screams were coming from, and when he got there, he saw a bunch of furry little pink furballs being chased around by some sort of ice golem. He hated to see this, and he quickly jumped to the furball's defense. He fought off the ice golem and forced him to retreat. And once he scared off the ice golems, he turned over to the cute-looking furballs. He asked if they were okay, and they all nodded back in return. He had no idea what these little furball things were, and they had no idea who or what he was, but after being saved by him, the furballs immediately fell in love with him. They quickly huddled up to him and bounced up and down. The new troop was really happy to see this and felt super thrilled that he had just made not just one friend, but tons of them. It was starting to get cold, so the new troop made their way over to the cave where he got himself nice and warm. But because they were so much smaller than him, they had a hard time keeping up sometimes. And so the new troop made a small basket that had slung over his back just like a backpack, so that he could carry his little friends around with him wherever he wanted. As time went by, the new troop started to get hairier and hairier, so much to the point that it completely covered his body and face. This worked out well because it helped protect him from the freezing cold outside, and that meant that he could leave his cave without getting cold. The fur on his body grew the color white, and so he almost resembled an abominable snowman, or a yeti. So for a long time, the Yeti and his little Yeti mites, as he liked to call them, enjoyed themselves by playing games in the snow and just having an overall fun time every day. But one day, they were playing a game and one of the Yeti mites ran away. The Yeti couldn't find the Yeti mite, and so he started to follow the footsteps in the snow. He followed them for a long time, but at a certain point, the footsteps stopped because there was no more snow. And in the distance, the Yeti could hear the sound of other troops and buildings and what sounded like a village. So he thought that his little friend may have gone over there. So the Yeti made his way over to the Clash of Clans village, and once he got there, he looked around for a bit while all of the other troops looked at him awkwardly, wondering who the heck this hairy beast was. Finally, the Yeti found his lost Yeti mite hiding behind some defense called a scatter shot or something like that. The Yeti picked up his Yeti mite and was about to be on his way back to the cave. But on the way back, he passed by someone who looked very familiar, the village chief. He was standing right beside the town hall. The Yeti got super angry when he remembered that it was him who had banished him from the Clash of Clans village. And when the Yeti got angry, one of the Yeti mites sensed the Yeti's anger and immediately hopped out of the basket and charged the king. The Yeti mite then threw himself into the king and the town hall and then exploded. And before the Yeti mite himself could charge the village chief, the barbarian king stepped in and told him, Whoa there, we don't want any trouble, friend. What are you here for?" The Yeti's ears perked up at the word friend, and he immediately calmed down, and remembered that he just wanted to make new friends. He told the king that he was just here to search for his long-lost friend and that he was going to be on his way. But the king thought that the Yeti would make a super powerful new troop for the village considering his size and strength and his little friends. And so he told the Yeti that if he wanted, he could stay in the village and possibly fight in the army. And also that he could have way more friends if he stayed here. And once again, all the Yeti needed to hear was that he would have way more friends at the village, and so he agreed. And although he was still a super friendly troop, and you wouldn't think that he would attack any troops or defenses, you would be wrong, because any defenses or defending clan castle troops that attack any one of his friends will just make him mad, and he will start attacking whatever. And since his little Yeti mites like him so much, that when the Yeti is taken out, the Yeti might send themselves flying into whatever the nearest defense building is. Or whenever the Yeti gets mad himself, They start hopping off his back and fighting whatever is closest. And that there is the story of how the Yeti came into the world of Clash. The newest hero in Clash of Clans is a serious force to be reckoned with. She's named the Royal Champion, and for a good reason. Being a skilled fighter with a spear, she can wreck a decent fraction of a base all by herself. The village is obviously happy to have her on their team, but where did the skilled fighter come from? Where it appeared that she just appeared out of completely nowhere. Someone of her caliber would have required years of training and practice, and even with that much training, most troops still wouldn't be able to be as powerful as her. So who is this incredibly powerful new hero in Clash of Clans, and how did she find her way to the Clash of Clans village? Find out all of that inside of today's story, the Royal Champion's origin story. Surprisingly enough, the Royal Champion's story starts off in Clash Royale with the Blue King. A little while ago, the Blue King was having a really tough time. He was trying to push trophies super hard to get into one of the highest leagues possible, but for some reason he just couldn't make it into the next league. He tried using new decks and new troops, but nothing seemed to work. So one day when a new baby troop showed up at his doorsteps, he saw it as an opportunity to help get himself into one of the highest possible arenas. The baby came at the same time that the Ram Rider was introduced into the arenas, and it sort of resembled the Ram Rider in some way. But nonetheless, the king didn't question any of it, and he took the baby in and raised it as his own. The king loved the baby and gave it nothing but the best care. And the moment the baby was old enough, he gave her the best combat training too. The king had big plans to make the new troop into the best possible troop in the arena, that only he could use. So for a very long time, the king hid her away from the Red King and the rest of the other troops. He kept her in the now abandoned training camp arena, where every single day she would train. All day, every day. She was never allowed outside the arena or to see any of the other troops for the reason that the king didn't want anyone finding out about his little secret. The new troop became so incredibly good with all weapons and fighting techniques. But after she mastered all of the weapons, she wound up choosing the spear as her weapon of choice, as it was considered to be the most skilled and powerful weapon to use. But since the spear left a little bit of vulnerability on defense, she decided to add a shield in as well. But since this shield was sort of boring and she had already mastered all of the other weapons, she started to train with the shield. And after a ton of training, she could successfully use the shield not only on defense but on offense as well. And then after even more training on top of that, she could also use the shield as a sort of boomerang, where she would throw the shield off one of the buildings and it would bounce from one building to another before it finally ran out of momentum. And even after she had mastered the shield toss, she still had extra time, since the king never came back to get her until one day before Christmas. The king showed up one day at the abandoned arena and called for her. He didn't even give her a name, and so he basically just called her over by saying, "Yoo-hoo, over here." The king asked to see what she could do, and so she showed him her skills with the spear and the shield and all of the other weapons. And he was thoroughly impressed. The king then brought his new troop over to the Clash Royale arena for her grand reveal to the entire Clash universe. The king told the new troop that he brought her here for a reason, and that reason was because he needed her help to get to one of the highest possible arenas, the Grand Champion Arena. If he wins this next battle, he will be promoted to the Grand Champion. So for the first battle ever, the Grand Champion fought against all of the other troops and shredded through them with ease. She helped the Blue King come to an easy win in the match and advance to the next arena. The new troop was expecting the king to be extremely grateful and happy with her, since she had literally been training her whole life for this one reason, just to help the king get to this arena. She couldn't wait to see how he would say thank you and show his appreciation. And so after the match, the Blue King came over to the troop and said, "Nice, now get ready for the next battle." And that was it. The new troop was super upset and disappointed, since she had literally been training her whole life in complete isolation, locked away from everyone else, just so that he could say, "Nice." She was so powerful that she decided that she didn't need this. She was better off without him. And he was never much of a father figure anyway, so she didn't owe him anything. She was better than to just be some other troop that the king got to boss around and use to move up the ranks, and so she decided to leave and run away. With her amazing cardio, she ran all the way to the Clash of Clans village, and when she got there, she ran right into the middle of the battle without breaking a sweat. She ran into the middle of the ongoing battle, where it looked like the Clash of Clans king was yelling at his troops to retreat for some reason. She saw this as an opportunity to rush in and save the day, and so she did. She ran into the middle of the battle and threw her shield, which hit 4 defenses and completely destroyed them. And she then went on to help destroy the rest of the base and give the rest of the troops the confidence they needed to take out the base, rather than retreat like the pathetic Barbarian King. After the battle was done, the Barbarian King asked her who she was, because that was incredible. Unfortunately, she didn't have a name. Instead, she just said, "Call me the Royal Champion." just like one of the top Clash Royale arenas. And after that battle, the Barbarian King brought the royal champion back to the Clash of Clans village and offered for her to stay there, since all of the other troops already looked up to her after her heroics. And since all of the troops already looked up to her after her heroics, that she could also be a hero inside of the Clash of Clans village. The Royal Guardian quickly accepted the Barbarian King's offer, and the rest was history. And that there is the story of how the Royal Champion, the newest hero inside of Clash of Clans, was brought into the world of Clash. If you enjoyed, make sure to drop a like on the video and also leave a comment down below. These videos do take quite a while to write, edit, or just overall put together, and so a like and comment would be very, very much appreciated. And also, if you wanted to see more videos like this for other new troops that come into Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, Brawl Stars, or any of those, then make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications as well. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.